The first sign that something was wrong was not the Duke's expression, but the silence that followed it. London, May 1854, had taught Beatrice March that silence in a drawing-room was never empty. It was a blade waiting for a hand. She stood beside the tea-table at Harrowgate House, with the silver tray balanced against her gloved palm, her shoulders straight, her eyes lowered, and her breath held in the careful manner of a woman who had learned that being noticed could ruin her faster than being ignored. Around her, the room glowed with all the soft violence of good society. Candlelight trembled against gilt mirrors. Pale gowns brushed the Aubusson carpet. Diamonds flashed at throats that had never swallowed fear. Ladies murmured behind painted fans, while gentlemen stood near the mantel with the polished ease of men who had never wondered whether one wrong word might cost them supper, shelter, and a written character. Beatrice had poured tea for countesses, widows, daughters, and dowagers for nearly an hour without spilling a drop. That was her gift now, not music, though she had once played well, not French, though she could still read it, not the fine hand her father had praised when there had still been money for praise. Her gift was disappearance. She knew how to move between chairs without touching silk. She knew how to hear cruelty without flinching. She knew how to accept a cup, fill it, and return it as though her hands did not remember having once been soft. Then Alaric Weatherby, Duke of Northmere, lifted his cup to his mouth, and the drawing-room seemed to lean toward him. He had arrived late enough to make his entrance matter, and quietly enough to make every other man appear careless. He was tall, dark-haired, and severe in a black coat cut so precisely that even the most ambitious mothers in the room appeared to adjust their daughters by instinct. The Duke of Northmere was not merely eligible. He was useful, old title, vast estate, political influence, no wife, no visible weakness. Lady Dorothea Fell, Marchioness of Harrowgate, had arranged the tea as though England itself had been invited to witness her daughter's future. Lady Verena Fell sat near the Duke in blue silk, bright as a sapphire and cold as the setting that held it. She had laughed twice at remarks that had not been amusing. She had lowered her lashes once, too often. She had asked Beatrice for more hot water without looking at her face. Beatrice had obeyed. That was the order of the world. A lady asked. A maid moved. A duke observed. Or so Beatrice had believed until his fingers paused on the handle of the porcelain cup. The movement was small. No one else might have noticed if every woman in the room had not already been watching him with the anxious hope that he might choose where to place his attention. His gaze lowered to the amber surface of the tea. He did not cough. He did not grimace. He simply became still. Lady Verena leaned forward at once. "Your Grace, is something wrong?" The Duke set the cup down with a sound so soft it should not have carried. It did. "The tea is bitter." 3 words, no accusation, no anger, yet every face turned toward the tea-table as though Beatrice had dropped a match into the curtains. Lady Dorothea's smile tightened. "Bitter? How extraordinary, Mrs. Pike. Did the kitchen send up a fresh pot?" The housekeeper, standing near the door with her hands folded, paled. "Yes, my lady." Beatrice felt the heat of the kettle still lingering through her gloves. She had brewed nothing. That was not her place. She had only carried, poured, offered, and vanished. Lady Verena took her own cup, tasted it delicately, and frowned in graceful confusion. "Mine is perfectly pleasant." Several ladies followed, each lifting her cup in a small flutter of porcelain and suspicion. A countess near the window murmured, "As is mine." Another said, "Perhaps His Grace prefers it weaker." It might have ended there, absorbed into the 1,000 tiny discomforts that society forgave when no one needed a victim. But Lady Verena's eyes had already found Beatrice. They were not confused now. They were certain. The maid served his grace. The words fell gently. That made them worse. Beatrice kept her hands still on the tray. She had learned long ago that the first defense of a servant was not innocence, but posture. If she trembled, they would call it guilt. If she spoke too quickly, they would call it insolence. If she wept, they would call it manipulation. Lady Dorothea turned her head with slow displeasure. Beatrice. She did not say Miss March. No one in Harrowgate House said that below stairs. Did you alter his Grace's tea? A low sound moved through the room. Not shock exactly. Appetite. Beatrice stepped forward because a servant summoned must move before she answers. No, my lady. I poured what I was given. Lady Verena's laugh was delicate enough to pass for embarrassment on the Duke's behalf. How unfortunate. Perhaps she wished to make a display. Some girls mistake nearness to rank for importance. Beatrice felt the sentence strike with practiced aim. Not because it was clever, but because it was safe. A lady could suggest ugliness without naming it. A maid could not defend herself without proving she had forgotten her place. The footman by the far wall stared at the carpet. Mrs. Pike looked as though she wanted to speak and knew better. Lady Dorothea rose slightly from her chair. You will apologize to His Grace at once. Beatrice turned toward the Duke. His face had not changed. That unnerved her more than anger would have done. He watched the table, the cup, the tray, and then her hands, as if every detail in the room had weight, and none of them were beneath him. She curtsied, low enough to satisfy rank, not so low that her knees betrayed her. Your Grace, I regret that your tea was unpleasant. I did not alter it. A lady near the mantel whispered, How bold! Another answered, These girls are all bold now if one treats them kindly. Lady Dorothea's mouth hardened. That is not an apology. No, my lady, Beatrice said quietly. It is the truth. The silence changed. It sharpened. Beatrice knew she had made a mistake, yet something in her would not bend farther. Not today. Not when the room wanted her guilt, because guilt was convenient. Lady Verena's fan closed with a soft snap. Mamma, truly, we need not endure impertinence. His Grace has been insulted in our house. Lady Dorothea looked toward the Duke, and Beatrice saw the calculation beneath the outrage. The Marchioness needed him pleased. Everyone knew it. A daughter in blue silk, an old house with expensive flowers, invitations arranged with military precision. All of it pointed toward one desire. The Duke of Northmere must leave Harrowgate House thinking of Lady Verena, not bitter tea. Mrs. Pike, Lady Dorothea said, this girl is not to return to the drawing-room. Her character will be reviewed before evening. Beatrice felt the words open beneath her like a trapdoor. A reviewed character meant a stained character. A stained character meant no respectable household would take her. No household meant no wages. No wages meant the small rented room where her mother's old trunk waited would be lost by Michaelmas. She had survived the fall from gentleman's daughter to servant because she had kept one thing clean, her name. Now a cup of tea could take even that. She looked at the tray because looking at any face would be too much. The polished silver reflected fragments of the room, chandeliers broken into stars, white fingers around cups, Lady Verena's blue skirt, the Duke's black sleeve. Her own face appeared only as a pale blur, invisible even there. Then the Duke spoke. No, no one moved. Lady Dorothea blinked. Your Grace. Alaric Weatherby did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The maid will remain. Lady Verena's smile returned, thinner than before. Surely you're not troubled by a domestic correction? I am troubled by careless conclusions. The words were so controlled that they made Lady Verena colour. He turned his gaze at last to Beatrice, not warmly, not gently, but directly, and directness from a man of his rank was almost a touch. You poured from that pot? Yes, Your Grace. For everyone? Yes, Your Grace. And no other guest complains of bitterness. Beatrice heard 3 women shift in their chairs. No, Your Grace. The Duke looked at Lady Dorothea. Then the pot is unlikely to be the cause. Lady Verena gave a light laugh. Perhaps the girl added something after pouring. Servants do handle trays very closely. Beatrice's fingers tightened beneath the tray's rim. The Duke's eyes moved to her hands again. She hated that he noticed. There was a small red mark near her thumb where steam had kissed through a worn seam in her glove. She had hidden it all afternoon. "Did you stir my cup?" he asked. "No, Your Grace. I placed it beside you as it was served." "Who did stir it?" The question entered the room like cold air. No one answered. Lady Dorothea's face had begun to show strain beneath powder and pride. "Your Grace, I assure you, Harrowgate House will manage its servants." "I do not doubt that, Lady Harrowgate, but as the bitter cup was placed before me, I have an interest in how it became bitter." The Duke reached toward his saucer. Beatrice saw, with a sudden tightening in her chest, the engraved silver spoon lying where his fingers had left it. The handle bore the Harrowgate crest, a falcon with lifted wings. A faint stain clung near the bowl of the spoon, darker than tea, dull against the shine. Had it been there before? She could not be certain. She had arranged spoons on the tray, but not that spoon, not from that service. Her mouth went dry. The room watched him now with a different hunger. The scandal had shifted shape. It was no longer merely a maid's mistake. It was becoming a question, and questions were dangerous when they entered houses built on appearances. The Duke lifted the silver spoon from his saucer. Alaric Weatherby held the silver spoon where the candlelight could catch it, and the entire drawing room seemed to understand at once that the small bright object had become more dangerous than any accusation spoken aloud. Beatrice stood with the tray still braced against her palm, too aware of the heat beneath her glove, the weight of every gaze, and the awful discipline required not to look grateful before she had been saved. Gratitude shown too early could be mistaken for guilt. Hope shown too plainly could be punished. The Duke turned the spoon slowly between his fingers. Near the bowl, where tea should have left only a pale amber gloss, a darker smear clung in a narrow crescent. It was not large. It was not dramatic. Yet the Duke studied it with the patient severity of a man accustomed to finding truth in what careless people overlooked. Lady Verena's laugh came first, high and light. "Surely, Your Grace, we aren't to hold an inquiry over a spoon." Alaric did not look at her. "No, we are to hold our judgment until the spoon explains what the room was too eager to decide." The words changed the air. A countess near the window lowered her cup. One gentleman by the mantel cleared his throat and then thought better of speaking. Lady Dorothea's fingers tightened around the carved arm of her chair, but her voice remained smooth. "Your Grace, I fear you give this household trifle more dignity than it deserves. The girl has been careless. Nothing more." "Carelessness would have affected the pot," Alaric said. It did not. He set the spoon against the saucer, not down, but angled so the stain remained visible. The maid poured from a common pot. "Several ladies have tasted their cups. No one else finds the tea bitter." "Perhaps His Grace has a more sensitive palate," Lady Verena said. Her smile asked the room to join her. No one dared. Alaric's gaze moved to Beatrice. Did you add sugar? No, Your Grace. Milk? No, Your Grace. Did I touch the cup before tasting? Only the handle, Your Grace. And after you placed the cup before me, did you remain near the table? Beatrice forced herself to answer without haste. No, Your Grace. Lady Verena asked me to bring more hot water to the side table. I stepped away. Lady Verena's fan paused. It was only a moment. Beatrice saw it because fear made every movement sharp. The Duke saw it because nothing in the room seemed to escape him. Did you stir the cup before you stepped away? He asked. No, Your Grace. Then someone else did. Lady Dorothea rose fully now, her silk skirts whispering with displeasure. That is an extraordinary implication to make in my drawing room. It is an ordinary implication, Alaric replied, when one follows ordinary facts. The Marchioness flushed. She was not used to correction, and certainly not correction that sounded like politeness sharpened to a point. You cannot imagine that one of my guests would tamper with your tea. I imagine nothing. I observe that my tea was bitter, the pot was not, and the residue rests on the spoon. Lady Verena leaned forward, her blue silk shimmering like water over ice. But servants handle spoons, don't they? She could have taken it from anywhere. It's hardly proof of anything except that she was careless with your service. Beatrice heard the trap. If she answered, she would be insolent. If she remained silent, the lie would stand. She lowered her eyes to the spoon. The Harrogate crest glimmered on the handle. A falcon, lifted wings, not the plain floral set she had placed on the tray. Her heart gave one hard, quiet strike. Alaric followed her gaze. You recognize it? The question was gentle in form, but it carried command. Beatrice swallowed. It is not from the service I arranged, Your Grace. Lady Dorothea's face went still. Beatrice. Her name, spoken that way, was a warning wrapped in ice. Beatrice's fingers tightened beneath the tray. The spoons on the tray were the rose-handled set, my lady. This spoon bears the Harrogate crest. A whisper ran through the room. Not loud. Society rarely needed volume to wound. Lady Verena's cheeks colored, but her voice remained airy. How remarkable that she remembers spoons so well after claiming to remember nothing else. Beatrice kept her eyes lowered. The Duke did not. She remembers the tools of her labor. That is not remarkable. It is competent. The word struck Beatrice more deeply than praise would have done. Competent, not sly, not bold, not ungrateful. Competent, one clean word laid between her and ruin. Lady Dorothea's mouth tightened. Your Grace, I must insist that the management of my servants remains my concern. And I must insist that the question of who altered what I drank remains mine. He turned the spoon once more. This residue has a medicinal smell. Bitter root, perhaps, gentian. Wormwood. Something used in household tonics. A few ladies recoiled delicately, though none had been asked to taste it. Mistress Pike, the housekeeper, made a small sound near the door before she stilled herself. Alaric looked at her. Does Harrogate House keep such tonics? The housekeeper's eyes flicked to Lady Dorothea. Most houses do, Your Grace. In the still room, yes, Your Grace. Lady Dorothea spoke before he could ask more. Enough. I will not have my household paraded before my guests as though we were a common shop. Alaric replaced the spoon on the saucer with precise care. Then do not parade guilt before them without proof. For a moment, no one breathed comfortably. Beatrice felt the room split around that sentence. On one side stood rank, convenience, and Lady Dorothea's need to have the matter finished before it stained her daughter's prospects. On the other stood one spoon, one bitter cup. and a duke who had not yet decided what the truth was, only that it had not been given permission to speak. Lady Verena's voice softened. "Your Grace, you're very generous to concern yourself, but a girl in service can become confused under pressure. Perhaps she meant no harm." Beatrice almost laughed. It rose in her throat like pain. A moment earlier, she had been malicious. Now, because the Duke doubted it, she was merely confused. Alaric heard the shift as clearly as she did. "Miss Fell, confusion is not improved by accusation." Lady Verena's smile thinned. "No, of course, Miss Fell. Not Lady Verena." Beatrice noticed the small demotion in intimacy, and so did Lady Verena. Lady Dorothea moved toward the bell pull. "Mistress Pike will take the girl below. We shall discuss her future when our guests have gone." "No," Alaric said again. This time the word was quieter, which made it final. "No dismissal, no signed statement, no punishment. Not until I have heard who had access to the still room, who handled the side table, and who placed this spoon beside my cup." "You overstep, Your Grace." "I was served a tampered cup in your house, Lady Harrowgate." "I am stepping exactly where the insult was placed." The Marchioness went pale under her powder. The insult, that word did what Beatrice's innocence could not. It made the matter aristocratic. It lifted the stain from a servant's character and set it, however briefly, against the honor of the house. Every guest understood the difference. A maid could be sacrificed. A duke could not be brushed aside. Alaric looked again to Beatrice. "You will remain available to answer questions." She curtsied. Her knees did not tremble until she bent them. "Yes, Your Grace." His gaze dropped to her hand. Not long enough for the room to follow, long enough for her to know that he had seen the burned place near her thumb. "And she will not be threatened into agreement," he added. "I prefer truth uncoached." Lady Dorothea's eyes flashed. "My servants are not coached. Then there is no harm in waiting." The room had no answer for that. It settled into awkward movement. Cups were lifted and put down. Fans opened. Someone mentioned the opera too loudly. Someone else praised the weather, though no one had looked outside for an hour. The tea continued, because society could survive almost any moral discomfort if porcelain remained in hand. Beatrice was ordered at last to take the tray away. No one apologized. No one looked directly at her except the Duke, and even he did not soften. Yet, as she lifted the tray, the silver spoon remained on his saucer, guarded by his hand as though it were no longer part of Lady Dorothea's service, but a witness under his protection. Beatrice left the drawing room with her spine straight and her pulse unsteady. The passage outside felt colder. The air below stairs struck her with the familiar smells of coal smoke, starch, polish, and fear. By the time she reached the servants' hall, the story had already arrived ahead of her, twisted into sharper shapes by every step it had taken. The scullery maid stared. A footman turned away. Mistress Pike followed with her keys at her waist, and worry pressed into every line of her face. "You should have held your tongue," the housekeeper said under her breath. Beatrice set the tray down carefully. "I told the truth. Truth doesn't keep a place by itself." "No," Beatrice said, but a lie would not have kept it either. Mistress Pike looked toward the stairs, then leaned closer. Her voice dropped until it barely disturbed the air. "Listen to me, girl. His Grace may delay my lady while he's above stairs, but he cannot stand between you and this house once he leaves it. If Lady Harrowgate wants you gone, you will be gone." Beatrice looked down at her gloved hand. The burn near her thumb had begun to throb. Above stairs, a duke had lifted a spoon and stopped a room from swallowing her whole. Below stairs, The floor remained exactly where it had always been beneath her feet. Hard, cold, unforgiving. She closed her fingers slowly, hiding the tremor inside her palm. "Then I must hope," she said, "that he finds the truth before she finds a reason to bury me." The smell came back to Beatrice before the Duke's message did. It rose from memory with a bitterness so clean and sharp that, for a moment, Servants' Hall, with its coal smoke and damp wool and polished copper, seemed to fall away. She was standing again in the still room at dawn 3 days earlier, sorting clean cloths beside the shelves of household remedies, while Mistress Pike counted keys at the door. There had been lavender water, vinegar, beeswax, dried mint, jars of horehound, and one dark bottle pushed behind the others, with a paper label browned at the edges. Gentiana. She had read it without meaning to, then looked away because a maid who read too easily invited questions. Now the word returned with the same taste the Duke had found in his cup. Gentian, bitter root. A household tonic, harmless enough in drops, vile enough in tea to make any guest believe himself insulted. Beatrice gripped the edge of the table until the worn wood pressed through her glove. If the bottle had been used, someone had gone to the still room. Someone with access. Someone above suspicion. Beatrice. Mistress Pike's voice cut through the noise below stairs. "His Grace has asked for you." The room went quiet in the way servants' rooms did when danger arrived wearing livery. The scullery maid stopped wiping a bowl. The second footman looked toward the floor. No one smiled. A duke asking for a maid could mean rescue, ruin, or both, and the household knew better than to guess aloud. Beatrice folded her burned hand into her apron. "Where?" "The small pantry off the west passage. Door open. I am to stand within sight." Mistress Pike sounded relieved by that last part, though not enough to be calm. "You will answer only what you are asked. You will not volunteer cleverness. Cleverness does girls like us no good when ladies are listening from behind doors." "Girls like us?" Beatrice said softly. Mistress Pike's face changed. For one brief second, age and fatigue replaced authority. "Yes, girls who cannot afford to be right too loudly." Beatrice followed her through the service corridor, past the warming closet and the narrow stair that led upward into the polished world. Every step felt measured against her future. Above, a piano had begun again, too delicate and bright for a house where a woman's character hung from a spoon. The small pantry stood between the dining room and the back passage, with shelves of folded linen on one side and glass-fronted cupboards on the other. The door had been left wide open. A footman waited at the far end of the passage. Mistress Pike remained near the threshold, keys resting against her black skirt. The Duke of Northmere stood by the narrow window, not seated, not lounging, not playing at kindness. That steadied Beatrice more than softness would have done. Softness could be a trap. His restraint, at least, had edges she could see. "Miss March," he said. Her breath stopped for half a beat. "Not Beatrice, not girl, Miss March." Mistress Pike's gaze flickered. "Your Grace," Beatrice answered, curtsying. Alaric Weatherby studied her with that same unhurried attention, as though the plain cap, dark dress and apron were not enough to explain her. "You recognized the spoon?" "Yes, Your Grace. And the smell." Beatrice hesitated. "I believe so. Belief is useful. Precision is better." There was no cruelty in it, only expectation. It stirred something old in her, something that had once sat at a schoolroom table with ink on her finger, and her father saying, "If you know a thing, Beatrice, do not make it smaller to comfort fools." She lowered her eyes before the memory showed on her face. "Gentian, Your Grace, or something near it." A bitter root used in tonics. Mistress Pike made a warning sound beneath her breath. The Duke looked toward the housekeeper. "Did you instruct her not to know that?" Mistress Pike stiffened. "No, Your Grace, but a maid's knowing can be mistaken for meddling. Only by those who prefer ignorance in their servants." Beatrice felt the words move through the pantry like warmth held at a distance. She did not dare accept them as comfort. "How do you know the word gentian?" he asked. There it was. The question she had spent nearly 2 years avoiding. Beatrice looked at the folded napkins on the shelf. They were stacked with such care, white square upon white square, each one more acceptable than the truth. I saw it on a bottle in the still-room. Many people see labels. Fewer read them. Yes, Your Grace. You read Latin? A little. French? Her fingers tightened. Enough for labels and letters. Who taught you? Mistress Pike shifted at the door, but the Duke did not look away from Beatrice. The open doorway made the questioning proper. It did not make it easy. "My father," Beatrice said at last, "Mr. Edwin March of Wiltshire. He was a gentleman of modest means before those means became too modest to name." The sentence landed quietly, but it cost her more than an accusation. A servant's poverty was ordinary. A gentlewoman's fall was entertainment. She had hidden the shape of her former life because pity could be as dangerous as contempt. Alaric's expression did not soften, yet something in his attention altered. It became less investigative, more careful. "And after his death, debts, Your Grace, a cousin who inherited what little remained, a mother who did not survive the winter after him. Service was more respectable than dependence on relations who had already counted the silver." "How long have you been at Harrowgate House?" "Nearly 2 years. And Lady Harrowgate knows your history?" Beatrice nearly smiled. "My lady knows whatever portion of it was convenient when she hired me." The Duke's mouth changed by the smallest degree, not quite amusement. "That is not an answer taught below stairs." "No, Your Grace. You must take care with that. I do." The words came too quickly. She steadied them. "I take care with every word." He looked down at her gloved hand. "Except when accused falsely." Beatrice felt the burn throb, hidden and seen at once. Then care becomes difficult. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The passage beyond the pantry remained open. Mistress Pike was there. The footman was there. Yet the silence between Beatrice and the Duke felt private in a way that propriety could not measure. Not intimate, not improper, only honest, and honesty had become so rare in Harrowgate House that it seemed almost indecent. Alaric turned to the matter before the silence could deepen. "Who has keys to the still-room?" "Mistress Pike keeps the household ring." "Lady Harrowgate has a key. Lady Verena has taken one before, when she wanted rose water or hartshorn." "Taken one?" Mistress Pike answered this time, reluctantly. "Borrowed, Your Grace. Young ladies do not ask as servants do." "No," Alaric said. "They command in softer voices." Beatrice glanced at him before she could stop herself. He had not spoken loudly, but Mistress Pike paled as if he had. The Duke continued. "Was anything missing from the still-room this morning?" Beatrice thought of the bottle half hidden behind dried mint. She had noticed the level because the glass had caught the lamplight. "I cannot swear to it." "You are not being asked to swear. You are being asked to remember." The gentian bottle seemed lower than before. "Before when?" 3 days ago. I was folding cloths. The label faced outward then. Today, when I carried the tray from the drawing-room, I remembered the smell." "Did you touch the bottle?" "No, Your Grace." "Did anyone see you near it?" Beatrice's stomach tightened. "Not that I know." The Duke's gaze sharpened. That is different from no. Yes, she forced herself to meet his eyes, because in this house, Your Grace, one is often seen only when someone needs blame. Mistress Pike whispered, Beatrice, but Alaric did not rebuke her. He looked at her as though the sentence had fitted itself into some larger pattern he had already begun to suspect. You will not sign anything, he said. No apology beyond what you have already given. No confession. No statement prepared by Lady Harrowgate or anyone acting for her. If you are pressed, you will say, I instructed you to wait. Mistress Pike's eyes widened. Your Grace, my lady will not like that. I have not asked her to like it. Beatrice should have felt safer. Instead, fear rose higher, because protection from a duke was still attention, and attention had already turned. Lady Verena's glance into something bright and poisonous. Why would you do this? She asked, before Prudence stopped her. Mistress Pike inhaled sharply. Beatrice lowered her eyes at once. Forgive me, Your Grace. No, he said. It is a fair question. He stepped no closer. That mattered. He kept distance as carefully as another man might have used charm. I am doing it because a room full of well-bred people found it easier to condemn the woman holding the tray than to ask who touched the cup. I dislike easy answers when they are wrong. The words should not have warmed her. They did. She curtsied to hide it. Then I hope the right answer is found quickly. So do I, Miss March. A sound came from the upper passage, light and musical. Lady Verena's voice. She was speaking to someone unseen, laughing as though nothing bitter had entered the house except an amusing servant's error. The Duke heard it. Beatrice saw his expression settle back into cold control. Return to your duties, he said, and remember what I told you. Mistress Pike guided Beatrice from the pantry before another dangerous word could be spoken. The corridor beyond felt narrower than before. At the turn near the still-room door, Beatrice slowed. Something pale blue had caught on the lower hinge, nearly hidden where the wood met the stone. A torn ribbon, fine silk, not servant's cotton, not household tape. She bent as though to adjust her shoe and slipped it into her palm. The color was unmistakable. Lady Verena had worn that same blue at tea. Beatrice closed her fingers around the ribbon, and for the first time since the bitter cup touched the Duke's lips, fear was joined by something sharper. Proof, perhaps, or the beginning of it. Beatrice did not show the ribbon to anyone. That was the first brave decision she made, and because it was brave, it felt very much like fear. She kept it folded inside the narrow seam of her apron, tucked where her burned thumb could feel the faint ridge of silk whenever she moved. Fine blue silk had no business near the still-room hinge. It belonged on a lady's gown, tied at a wrist, fluttering from a bodice, or dropped deliberately where a servant might find it and be foolish enough to shout discovery before understanding danger. Beatrice had not survived 2 years in Harrowgate House by mistaking evidence for safety. Evidence was only useful if it remained alive long enough to speak. All afternoon, the house pretended to return to order. Above stairs, the last guests departed in a soft procession of gloves, feathers, and murmured speculation. Below stairs, the servants carried trays with their eyes lowered and their ears sharpened. Every bell seemed louder. Every footstep on the back stairs made someone look up. Beatrice scrubbed spoons in a basin of hot water while Mistress Pike counted the tea linen twice and said nothing about the blue ribbon. The housekeeper did not know. That, too, was protection, not from Beatrice, but for her. The wrong word could travel faster than a carriage in London, and Lady Dorothea Fell had built an entire household upon words that servants were not allowed to answer. Beatrice dried the rose-handled spoons one by one. Rose pattern, plain bowl, narrow stem, the set she had arranged before tea. She had counted 12 before carrying the tray upstairs. 12 rose-handled spoons, polished until the pattern shone clean beneath candlelight. The spoon in the Duke's saucer had not belonged among them. The Harrogate Falcon had marked it too clearly. Someone had changed it after the tray left the servants' pantry, or at the side table, while Beatrice fetched the hot water Lady Verena had requested. That small errand, asked in a voice as careless as a falling petal, had pulled Beatrice 10 feet away from the cup. 10 feet had been enough to ruin her. Do not stare at the silver as though it might confess, Mistress Pike muttered beside her. Silver is more honest than people, Beatrice said, and regretted it at once. The housekeeper's mouth tightened, though not unkindly. You are frightened. Yes, the word surprised them both. Beatrice had not meant to say it so plainly. Mistress Pike's hands paused above the folded cloth. Good. Fear keeps a girl from making speeches. Beatrice looked toward the narrow passage that led to the still-room. Fear also keeps ladies safe when they should be questioned. That is not your place. It is my name. Mistress Pike turned then, and for a moment the whole burden of service showed in her face. Your name will not be protected by proving a lady false, unless someone far grander than you is willing to stand in front of the proof. Beatrice thought of the Duke's hand holding the silver spoon, steady beneath the candles. He saw it. He saw a spoon that is not the same as staying, but he did stay, near 4 o'clock, when the household had expected his carriage to be called. Word came down that His Grace would remain for dinner at Lady Dorothea's request. The reason, repeated by the first footman with great importance, was that the Duke had business to discuss with the Marchioness concerning an old family matter and a possible future alliance. The servants understood the phrase at once. Lady Verena's prospects had not been destroyed by the bitter cup. They had merely acquired an obstacle, and Lady Dorothea meant to remove it before sunset. Beatrice carried clean napkins toward the linen press and passed the half-open library door on the service side, just as Lady Verena's voice drifted through. Mamma is distressed, Your Grace. She prides herself on order. Alaric Weatherby answered with cool courtesies. Order that depends upon haste is usually hiding something. How severe you make us sound, do I? A lesser man might find it charming that I defend my household. A wiser woman would ask why it needs defending. Beatrice stopped too suddenly. The napkins shifted in her arms. From inside the room came the soft tap of Lady Verena's fan against her palm. You have an unforgiving mind, Your Grace, only toward convenient mistakes. A chair leg whispered against the carpet. Beatrice moved before she could be caught listening. Her heart beat with a strange and unwanted warmth. He had stayed. Not because he believed her entirely, perhaps, not because she mattered beyond the question placed before him. But he had stayed, and in Harrogate House that was almost an act of rebellion. By late afternoon, she had learned more by silence than accusation ever would have drawn out. Lady Verena had sent a maid twice for rose water she did not use. Lady Dorothea had asked Mistress Pike for the still-room keys and returned them after nearly 20 minutes. The second footman admitted in a whisper that Lady Verena had stood near the side table while Beatrice fetched the hot water. No one would say that aloud upstairs. Not yet. A footman's memory could be dismissed as confusion. A maid's suspicion could be called spite. A housekeeper's discomfort could be blamed on age. Beatrice needed something that did not tremble when stared at. She returned to the service pantry once the dinner settings were counted and checked the list written that morning in Mistress Pike's hand. Rose tea service. 12 cups, 12 saucers, 12 rose spoons, 1 sugar tongs, 1 cream ladle. Her eyes returned to the line. 12 rose spoons. She opened the velvet-lined drawer where the used service had been placed after washing. 11 rose spoons lay in their grooves. The 12th place was empty. In its place, pushed slightly beneath the cloth as though hidden by haste, lay a crest-marked spoon from the Harrowgate set. Beatrice stared at it. The room seemed to narrow around her. The exchanged spoon was not an accident. It could not have wandered from one drawer to another. It had been moved, used, and returned wrongly by someone who did not know the servants counted what the family only admired. Looking for something? Lady Dorothea's voice struck from behind her. Beatrice closed the drawer before the Marchioness could see how much she had seen. She turned and curtsied. Only confirming the dinner linen, my lady. Lady Dorothea stood in the doorway in dark, green silk, handsome, composed, and cold, with the confidence of a woman who had never been required to explain why she entered a room. Mistress Pike tells me. His Grace made a needless difficulty over your conduct. Beatrice kept her gaze lowered. His Grace asked questions, my lady. Questions can be encouraged by the way a girl answers them. I answered what I was asked. You answered too well. The sentence was soft. It was also a confession of a kind. Beatrice felt the ribbon in her apron seam. Lady Dorothea stepped closer. Not enough to touch. Enough to make rank feel like a wall. There are servants who understand gratitude, Beatrice. They are kept. There are servants who mistake education for equality. They are dismissed. Beatrice's mouth had gone dry. Yes, my lady. You will say nothing further about spoons, cups, tonics, or anything you think you saw. By morning, I may decide this was a regrettable misunderstanding rather than a defect of character. And if I cannot say what is untrue, Lady Dorothea's smile did not reach her eyes. Then truth will become very expensive for you. The Marchioness left before Beatrice could answer. For several seconds, Beatrice remained beside the drawer, breathing through the tightness in her chest. Truth had always been expensive. It had cost her father his pride, when creditors arrived with polite voices. It had cost her mother warmth in a winter room. It had cost Beatrice her place among women who wrote invitations instead of carrying trays. But a lie was more expensive still. It took the last room inside a person and rented it to fear. She opened the drawer again and looked once more at the wrong spoon. Then she closed it carefully. Not yet. If she accused too soon, Lady Dorothea would call it invention. If she carried the spoon away, they would call it theft. So Beatrice did what service had taught her to do better than any lady understood. She remembered. After dinner was announced above stairs, the servants' hall emptied into motion. Beatrice was sent not to serve, but to mend a torn hem in the small sewing room below. That, too, was a form of watching. They wanted her out of sight. She had threaded the needle twice when she heard steps halt near the open door. The Duke stood in the passage with a footman several paces behind him, a folded note in his hand as if he had been directed badly on purpose. Miss March, he said. She rose at once. Your Grace. Lady Harrowgate tells me the tea service was cleaned and put away. Yes, Your Grace. Was it complete? There was no safe answer. Beatrice felt the entire house listening from behind stone and wood. She chose the smallest truth that could still breathe. Not as it was this morning, Your Grace. His eyes sharpened. Meaning? The rose set had 12 spoons when I arranged it. It did not have 12 when I checked it. He absorbed that without visible surprise, and the spoon from my saucer bears the Harrogate crest. A slight movement came from the far end of the passage. Silk, blue silk. Lady Verena appeared there, smiling as though she had wandered by accident. "Your Grace, Mama wondered where you had gone. We can't begin without you." Her gaze passed over Beatrice like a knife under velvet, still questioning the maid. Alaric did not step toward Beatrice, but he shifted almost imperceptibly so that Lady Verena's view of her narrowed, still questioning the spoon, Miss Fell. Her smile faltered, only for an instant, then it returned brighter. "How loyal you are to silver." "Silver does not flatter me. I value that." Beatrice lowered her eyes to hide the dangerous impulse to breathe. Lady Verena laughed, but it was not the laugh from tea. This one had edges. "Do come upstairs. People are beginning to talk." Then, let them improve the quality of their conversation. He turned back to Beatrice for a final moment. "Do not disturb the tea service." "No, Your Grace." He left with Lady Verena beside him, though not close enough to satisfy her. Beatrice sat again, only after their footsteps faded. Her hands had begun to shake. She gripped the needle until the tremor passed. He had shielded her without touching her. He had challenged Lady Verena without naming her. He had made Beatrice feel seen and not exposed, which was such an unfamiliar mercy that she almost distrusted it. Almost. The evening deepened. Dinner plates returned. Bells rang. Voices rose and fell above stairs. Beatrice finished the hem, carried it to the laundry maid, and was sent at last to her narrow room under the eaves to fetch a clean apron. She climbed the back stairs, with the blue ribbon still hidden against her waist, and the wrong spoon fixed in memory. Her room was barely wider than a bed, a washstand, and the small trunk that held the remains of her former life. She opened the door and stopped. Her blanket had been moved. Not much. An inch, perhaps 2. Enough. Beatrice stepped inside slowly. On the thin mattress, half tucked beneath the folded coverlet, lay a small paper packet tied with thread. She did not touch it. She did not need to. Even from where she stood, the bitter smell rose into the air. Beatrice stood in the doorway of her narrow room and understood. With a calm so cold it almost felt like peace, that the trap had arrived before she could warn anyone it was being laid. The paper packet rested half beneath the coverlet, tied with plain thread, its edges folded in the neat practical style used for powders in a stillroom or apothecary's shop. It had not been there when she had left that morning. She knew every inch of that little room because poverty made a woman intimate with her possessions. The washstand had one cracked basin. The trunk held 2 old books, a black ribbon from her mother's mourning cap, and a pair of gloves too worn for any lady but too precious for Beatrice to discard. The bed sagged toward the wall. The blanket had been mended at the corner with grey thread because white had run out last winter. Nothing entered that room without being noticed. Nothing, except what someone with a key nerve and rank wished to place there. She did not touch the packet. That was the second brave decision, and the harder one because every instinct shouted at her to hide it before the house saw. But hiding it would make it hers. Moving it would place the powder on her fingers. Destroying it would become confession. Before anyone had asked a question, she remained where she was, one hand on the doorframe, the other closed over the blue ribbon hidden in her apron seam, and listened. Footsteps sounded below. Not one pair, several, too many for chance. Mistress Pike's voice rose faintly from the stairwell. "My lady, the maids' rooms are not prepared for inspection at this hour." Lady Dorothea answered, cool and clear, then they shall be all the more honest. Beatrice's breath left her slowly. So that was the shape of it. They had not meant her to discover the packet alone and panic. They had meant to arrive while it remained in place, fresh enough to accuse, visible enough to condemn. She stepped back from the bed and folded her hands before her apron. By the time Lady Dorothea reached the threshold with Mistress Pike behind her and two maids hovering in the passage, Beatrice was standing in the center of the room as if awaiting a summons, not a sentence. Lady Verena came last. She should not have been below stairs at all. Her blue silk hem hovered above the plain boards, like a lie too fine for the room that held it. "How touching," Verena said softly. "She looks almost innocent." Mistress Pike shot Beatrice one quick, stricken glance. Beatrice did not return it. If she looked at kindness, she might break. Lady Dorothea stepped inside without asking permission, because as a servant's room was not considered a place where permission lived. Her gaze moved over the washstand, the peg, the trunk, the narrow bed. She did not search. She already knew where to look. "Turn down the coverlet," she said. No one moved. The younger housemaid near the door swallowed hard. Mistress Pike went pale. Beatrice heard herself speak before fear could persuade her into silence. "My lady, I would ask that no one touch what is there until His Grace has been informed." Lady Dorothea turned with magnificent slowness. "Until His Grace has been informed?" "Yes, my lady. Do you now govern this household through the Duke of Northmere?" Lady Verena gave a small gasp, theatrical enough for any drawing-room. "Mamma, perhaps we were wrong. Perhaps the tea was not the girl's ambition. Perhaps His Grace was." The words were cleanly spoken, with no impropriety named, but every woman in the passage understood the stain they carried. Beatrice felt the heat rise to her face. Not shame, fury. She kept it behind her teeth. Lady Dorothea lifted the coverlet herself. The packet rolled into full view. One of the maids whispered a prayer. Mistress Pike closed her eyes for 1 second. Verena's expression sharpened with satisfaction before sorrow replaced it. "Oh, Beatrice," she said, "why would you keep such a thing?" "I did not keep it, my lady. It was found in your bed. It was placed there." Lady Dorothea picked up the packet by its tied thread and held it away from her glove. A convenient answer, a true one. Truth again. The Marchioness's voice hardened. "You have grown fond of that word since His Grace noticed you." Beatrice looked at the packet, not at Verena. "If I wished to hide guilt, my lady, I would not place evidence beneath the first blanket any inspector would lift. A guilty girl often believes herself clever, and an innocent girl often finds herself surrounded before she has been accused." The passage went silent. It was too much. Beatrice knew it as soon as the sentence left her mouth. Lady Dorothea's eyes flashed, and Mistress Pike made a small sound of warning. "You will come downstairs," the Marchioness said. "You will make a statement before Mistress Pike and 2 witnesses. If you admit to mischief without further insolence, I may yet decide whether your dismissal shall be private. I cannot admit what I did not do. You can, and you will, if you wish to leave this house with anything resembling a character." The word struck exactly where it was aimed. Character. The one document a servant could not write for herself. The one possession a poor woman had to receive from people who might ruin it for convenience. Beatrice's fingers trembled, but her voice held. "Then I ask again that His Grace be informed." Lady Verena laughed under her breath. "You hear her, Mamma. She thinks he's her champion." "No," Beatrice said, and this time she looked at Verena. "I think he was served the cup. That makes the powder his concern." Lady Verena's smile thinned. Before Lady Dorothea could answer, a deeper voice came from the stair landing. Correct. Everyone turned. Alaric Weatherby stood at the top of the servants' stair, as though he had brought the whole authority of Mayfair into that cramped passage by choosing to stand there. A footman hovered behind him, anxious and useless. The Duke's gaze moved from Beatrice to the packet in Lady Dorothea's hand. It did not linger on the bed. It did not humiliate Beatrice by appearing to notice the poverty of the room. Lady Harrowgate, he said, you are holding the evidence. Evidence of your servant's deceit, perhaps. She is not my servant. His voice was quiet, and no evidence should be handled by the person eager to interpret it. Lady Dorothea's colour rose. I will not be instructed on the management of my household in a corridor. Then we shall keep this brief. He extended his gloved hand, but stopped before taking the packet. Mistress Pike, fetch a clean saucer from the pantry. The packet will be placed upon it and kept in your sight. No one will open it until those present are agreed upon what was found and where. Mistress Pike looked as if she had been given both command and rescue. Yes, your grace. Lady Verena's voice softened to injury. You cannot truly believe her over us. Alaric turned toward her. I have not said I believe anyone. That seems to distinguish me from the room. Beatrice lowered her eyes quickly, but not before she saw Verena's face tighten. Mistress Pike returned with the saucer. Lady Dorothea had no graceful way to refuse. She placed the packet down as though it had insulted her personally. Alaric looked at Beatrice. Did you touch it? No, your grace. Did you know it was in your room before entering? No, your grace. Who has access to this room? Mistress Pike answered. Myself, my lady by right of the household, and any maid sent with linen. The door does not lock from the outside with a private key. The corridor is often open. So several people could have entered. Yes, your grace. Lady Dorothea said. This is absurd. The packet was under her mattress. Beneath her coverlet, Beatrice said quietly. Alaric's eyes moved to her. You are certain? Yes, your grace. It was half tucked there, not hidden deep, as though meant to be found quickly. The Duke nodded once. Then that will be noted. Lady Verena stepped closer to her mother. Noted by whom? Are we to invite all London to examine the girl's bedding next? The insult was dressed as embarrassment, but it did its work. The two maids in the passage looked away from Beatrice. The footman stared at the wall. Beatrice felt her face burn again. Alaric's expression became colder. No one will speak of her bedding again. 4 simple words. They fell with enough force to make the passage still. Not tenderness, not romance. Protection, exact and public, placed where humiliation had tried to enter. Beatrice breathed once, carefully. Lady Dorothea drew herself up. I had intended mercy. You make that difficult. Mercy offered in exchange for a false confession is merely pressure wearing gloves. You presume it false. I presume it unproven. He looked to Mistress Pike. The packet remains untouched. The girl remains undismissed. If Lady Harrowgate requires a statement, it will say only that powder was discovered in Miss March's room in the presence of named witnesses, and that Miss March denies knowledge of it. Miss March, again. The name steadied her like a hand at her back, though he did not touch her. Lady Verena's eyes moved between them, bright with something more dangerous than anger. How fortunate she is, she murmured, to have earned such careful attention. Beatrice heard the next scandal being born. It would not be about tea. It would be about a maid who had somehow made a duke speak her name. Lady Dorothea swept from the room, taking Verena and the maids with her. Mistress Pike carried the saucer as if it were a lit candle. Alaric remained only a moment longer. The open door, the footman and the housekeeper's retreating steps kept the world proper. Still, the air felt changed. "You did well not to touch it," he said. "I was afraid to. Fear can be intelligent. It can also be exhausting." His gaze softened by the smallest measure. Yes, that single word, spoken as if he understood more than he intended to show, nearly undid her. She curtsied instead. "Thank you, Your Grace. Do not thank me yet. This has become larger than a bitter cup." He left before she could ask what he meant. By the time Beatrice descended to the servants' hall, the story had already changed shape. She heard it in fragments from behind doors and around corners. Powder in her bed, a scheme. A maid too educated for her place. A duke too interested for propriety. Later, when she reached into the pocket of her spare apron, her fingers closed around a folded scrap that had not been there before. The paper smelled faintly of lavender and sealing wax. Only one line had been written in a neat, slanted hand. "Confess, or the Duke will be ruined with you." By morning, the threat in Beatrice's apron pocket had become heavier than the packet of powder, heavier even than Lady Dorothea's silence. It had only 9 words, yet they had followed her through every hour before dawn. "Confess, or the Duke will be ruined with you." She had read them once, by the weak light of a tallow candle, then folded the paper so tightly that the crease cut across the word ruined. Ruin was a word society used with elegance, as if it described a fallen column in an Italian garden. Beatrice knew better. Ruin had a smell. Cold rooms sold books, letters unanswered, the stale wool of a dress worn past dignity. For a man like the Duke of Northmere, ruin would be inconvenience, scandal, perhaps a season of whispers. For a woman like Beatrice, it would be hunger with a polite name. Yet the note had not been written to frighten only her. It had been written to make her responsible for him. That was clever. Cruelty was often clever when it had been educated. She had slept less than an hour before Mistress Pike came to her room, face drawn, cap slightly crooked, as if the house itself had dragged her from bed. "Dress yourself neat," the housekeeper said. "His Grace has sent instructions." Beatrice rose at once. "Instructions? You are to leave Harrowgate House before luncheon." The floor seemed to tilt, though nothing moved. "I am dismissed." "Not dismissed." Mistress Pike pressed her lips together. "Removed." The word struck differently. Dismissed meant cast out. Removed meant handled. Packed, sent elsewhere for the convenience of people still in possession of rooms, names, and authority. "By whose order?" Beatrice asked. Mistress Pike looked away. "His Grace's arrangement. Lady Honoria, Vale has agreed to receive you as a temporary companion in her household until this matter is settled." Beatrice knew the name in the vague way servants knew the names that passed overhead. Dowager Countess, widowed, sharp-tongued, respectable enough to make impropriety retreat at the door. Safe then, proper, unanswerable. She should have felt relief. Instead, a hollow opened beneath her ribs. "Did he ask for my answer?" Mistress Pike softened, which was worse than severity. "Girl, when a duke finds you shelter, you do not complain that he chose the door." Beatrice turned toward the little trunk at the foot of her bed. There was so little to pack that the humiliation of leaving would take longer than the leaving itself. 2 dresses, 1 old shawl, her mother's ribbon, the books she had refused to sell because they were the last proof that she had once belonged to a room with daylight and lessons. She folded each item carefully. Care was the last defense of the powerless. Below stairs, the gossip had already begun to move. She heard it when she descended with her trunk, carried by the second footman, who would not meet her eyes. Sent away, His Grace insisted. Lady Verena wept at breakfast. My lady said it was mercy. No one said the worst sentence aloud, but Beatrice heard it waiting behind the others. The Duke had taken too much interest in a maid, therefore the maid must vanish before the interest became a scandal no one could ignore. At the service entrance, a carriage waited in the narrow mews behind Harrowgate House, plain but well kept, not the Duke's carriage. Lady Honoria's crest marked the door, discreet and old. Beatrice stood with her gloves buttoned and her throat tight, while Mistress Pike handed over a small bundle of bread and cheese, as if Beatrice were going on a journey rather than being removed from the centre of her own accusation. Then Alaric Weatherby appeared at the far end of the passage. He wore mourning black, severe as judgment, and his expression made the footman step back without being told. Miss March. Beatrice curtsied. Your Grace. Mistress Pike remained within sight. The carriage door stood open. Everything was proper. Everything was unbearable. Alaric's gaze moved to the trunk, then to her face. Lady Honoria Vale is expecting you. She is trustworthy, formidable, and disliked by most fools in London. You will be safer in her house than here. Safer, Beatrice repeated. Yes, from Lady Harrowgate. From Lady Harrowgate, from Miss Fell. From servants pressured to remember wrongly. From any further attempt to place evidence among your things. He spoke with such precision that each reason seemed a stone in a wall built for her protection. A good wall, a strong wall, a wall with no door she had chosen. And what will be said of my leaving? She asked. His face did not change, but his eyes sharpened. What is said will be managed. Something inside her tightened. Managed by whom? By me. The answer was meant to reassure. It did not. Beatrice looked at the carriage, at the crest, at the footman, holding her trunk as though her whole life weighed no more than a hat box. She thought of the note in her pocket. She thought of Lady Verena's voice, soft with poison. She thought of the Duke lifting the silver spoon and stopping a room from devouring her. Gratitude and hurt stood so close inside her that she could not separate them. Did you ask what I wished, Your Grace? Silence fell in the passage. Mistress Pike looked down at her keys. The footman froze. Alaric's expression altered at last. Not much, enough. A man accustomed to obedience had met a question no command could answer. I believed there was no time. There is often no time for poor women's wishes. Her voice remained quiet. That made the sentence worse. Only for decisions made over them, for their own good. He took that without anger. She respected him for it, and resented him for making respect possible. You are right, he said. The words came slowly, as if unused. I should have asked. Beatrice had expected defense, explanation. Perhaps cold correction. The apology, incomplete though it was, hurt more. I know you mean to protect me. I do. But if I am sent away now, they will say I ran because I was guilty. Or worse, because you wished me hidden. His jaw tightened. There it was. He had considered danger and evidence. He had not considered how society could turn protection into possession with a whisper. Lady Honoria's name will stand between you and that interpretation. A lady's name is a shield, Beatrice said. It is not my voice. For one moment, something almost like regret crossed his face. Then it vanished beneath control. Your voice will be needed soon. I am not removing you from the truth, Miss March. I am preserving you long enough to speak it. She wanted to believe him. She almost did. That was the danger. Then I will go, she said, not because I was ordered, but because I choose to keep the evidence alive. His gaze held hers. That is a better reason. "It is mine." A faint movement stirred at the upper landing. Blue silk appeared beyond the carved rail. Lady Verena looked down, one hand resting lightly on the banister, her face arranged in tender concern. "How sad," she called softly. I hope the girl understands that distance is kinder. People are beginning to talk. Alaric did not look up. Then they should learn to say less. Lady Verena's smile did not falter, but her hand tightened on the rail. Beatrice stepped into the carriage before Verena could see how badly the words had landed. The door closed. As the carriage rolled out of the mews, Beatrice looked once through the small window and saw the Duke standing where she had left him, very still, very powerful, and for the first time not entirely certain he had done right. Lady Honoria Vale's townhouse stood in a quieter square, where polished knockers and drawn curtains suggested old rank rather than new ambition. The Dowager Countess herself received Beatrice not in a drawing room, but in a small morning room with the door open and a companion's sewing near the window. She was thin, silver-haired, and sharp-eyed, dressed in black silk that made mourning look like authority. "So," Lady Honoria said, looking Beatrice over, "you are the maid who unsettled Northmere's famous composure." Beatrice curtsied. "I did not intend to, my lady." "Good. Intentional charm is tedious." For the first time in 2 days, Beatrice nearly smiled. Lady Honoria noticed, and approved only by looking less severe. "You will remain here as my temporary companion, not servant, not guest. Something inconveniently between, which is where most interesting women spend their lives. You will be respectable under my roof. If anyone questions it, I shall enjoy answering." "Thank you, my lady." "Do not thank me," Northmere asked, "and I owed his mother a favour. Also, Lady Harrowgate has been insufferable since 1839. That was the end of sentiment. Beatrice was given a small, clean room with a lock that worked, and a window overlooking a narrow garden. It should have comforted her. Instead, the stillness pressed against her. At Harrowgate House, danger had been immediate. Here, distance made her fear more imaginative. By afternoon, a note arrived from the Duke, carried by his groom and delivered through Lady Honoria's butler. It contained only 3 lines. The bitter tonic was not purchased from Harrowgate's usual apothecary. It came from a smaller shop near Holborn under Lady Dorothea's account. I will learn who collected it. Beatrice read it twice, then closed her eyes. The matter was larger than the cup, as he had said. Larger than Verena's jealousy. Larger than a maid's dismissal. Money had begun to show its outline beneath the scandal. Debt, accounts, purchases hidden where servants might see too much. Her thoughts returned to the narrow account table near Harrowgate's still room, where Mistress Pike kept household tallies before sending them upstairs. The ledger had been open yesterday when Beatrice fetched linen. A page near the back had been scored with fresh ink. She had seen Lady Dorothea's hand there, quick and angry, before the Marchioness closed the book. Beatrice stood suddenly. Lady Honoria, reading by the fire, did not look up. "Where are you going?" "To remember something, my lady." "That sounds dangerous. It may be useful." Lady Honoria lowered her book. "In my experience, the two are frequently related." Beatrice asked for paper and wrote down everything she could recall from the household ledger. Dates, a tonic purchase, an altered amount, a line where the ink had been darker. Then she stopped. One entry was missing from memory because the page itself had been torn at the edge. Not cut, torn, as if someone had removed the very line that would have explained why bitter medicine had been bought under a name no servant was meant to question. Beatrice pressed the pen to the paper until a drop of ink gathered at the nib. Before leaving Harrowgate House, she had thought the silver spoon was the key. Now she understood it was only the first thing that had refused to stay silent. By noon the next day, Beatrice learned that distance did not silence scandal. It only gave scandal room to dress more elegantly. Lady Honoria Vale had taken one look at the rumours, arriving with calling cards, and decided, with the cool satisfaction of a woman who had survived 4 decades of drawing rooms, that retreat would make Beatrice look guilty and Harrowgate House look injured. "We shall make a morning call," she announced, though it was already late enough that the word morning had become a social courtesy rather than a fact. Not to plead, not to explain, merely to remind Lady Harrowgate that I have eyes, a carriage, and no fear of unpleasant women. Beatrice stood beside the writing desk with the paper from the previous night folded in her glove. On it were the ledger details she remembered. A tonic purchase, a changed sum, a darker line of ink, a torn edge where the answer should have been, "My lady, if I return there, they will say I came to force myself into notice." They are already saying, "You forced yourself into a duke's notice. We may as well give them a better view of your posture." Lady Honoria's tone was dry, but her gaze was not unkind. "You will attend me as my temporary companion. You will speak when spoken to. You will not lower your eyes when insulted unless you choose to. And if anyone asks whether I know your circumstances, I shall say yes in a voice that discourages further education." So Beatrice returned to Harrowgate House through the front door, not the servants' entrance. The difference was only a few dozen feet of stone and polish, yet it felt like crossing a country. The footman who admitted them recognized her. His face changed, then closed. In the drawing-room, Lady Dorothea received Lady Honoria with a smile as thin as the rim of a teacup. Several callers sat already arranged in clusters, their faces bright with the particular innocence people wore when they had been discussing one subject and hoped it would enter the room. Lady Verena stood near the pianoforte in pale blue muslin, as though she had dressed to remind Beatrice of the ribbon hidden in her possession. Alaric Weatherby was there as well. He stood near the mantel, a black figure among pale gowns, his expression unreadable until his gaze found Beatrice. The smallest tension left his shoulders. It lasted less than a second. Lady Verena noticed anyway. "Lady Honoria," she said sweetly, "how brave of you to come. At my age, Miss Fell, one does not call it bravery. One calls it boredom with cowardice." A faint cough came from one of the older ladies. Lady Dorothea's smile sharpened. "And you have brought your new companion." The word "new" carried more accusation than any insult. Beatrice curtsied. "My lady." Lady Dorothea did not answer her. How very charitable. "No," Lady Honoria said. "Quite practical. Miss March reads clearly, writes legibly, and does not chatter. These qualities are rarer than rubies in London." Beatrice felt the room reassess her and resent doing so. A maid could be dismissed. A companion to a dowager countess had to be handled with gloves. Alaric spoke then, calm and distant. "Lady Honoria, your visit improves the room. Northmere, your standards have fallen if that is true." His mouth almost moved, almost. Then the footman entered with a silver salver, and the fragile balance broke. "A note for his grace," he said. Lady Dorothea's eyes flickered. The footman approached Alaric, but Lady Verena stepped forward first with a startled little laugh. How mysterious. Perhaps London has decided to conduct all business through Mamma's drawing room today. Alaric took the folded paper. Beatrice saw the seal, plain, pressed badly. Her pulse changed. He opened it. His face did not. That frightened her more. Lady Verena tilted her head. Bad news. A clumsy attempt at it, he said. Lady Dorothea's voice cooled. Your Grace. Alaric looked directly at Beatrice, not accusingly, warningly. It is signed B. March. The room drew in one breath. Beatrice felt Lady Honoria stiffen beside her. Lady Verena's hand rose to her throat. Surely not. There it was again. The false softness before the cut. What does it say? Lady Dorothea demanded. Alaric folded the note once. It requests that I meet Miss March in the garden passage before I leave. Privately. The word privately did more damage than a shout. Every face turned. In that instant, Beatrice understood the genius of the trap. The bitter tea had made her suspicious. The powder had made her dangerous. This note would make her immoral. A poor woman could survive many accusations if a greater person chose mercy. But impropriety with a duke did not require proof. It required only a pause long enough for imagination to enter. Lady Verena whispered, How dreadful for her! She must have mistaken kindness for invitation. Beatrice's fingers closed around her own folded paper. Her handwriting lay inside her glove. Dates, entries, the proof of what she had remembered. A forger who had seen her script could imitate the B, perhaps even the clean slope of March. Who had seen her writing? Household accounts, labels, linen lists, the old pages in Mistress Pike's room. She lifted her chin. I did not write that note. Lady Dorothea's laugh was quiet. My dear girl, no one asked you to confess aloud before company. No, Beatrice said. You intended me to be condemned before I could answer. The room went so still that even Lady Honoria looked at her sharply. It was too bold. It was also too true to call back. Lady Verena's eyes shone. Then why are you trembling? Beatrice looked at her. Because I am not made of marble, Miss Fell, only innocent. A murmur moved through the callers. Alaric stepped away from the mantel. Enough. Lady Dorothea lifted her chin. I agree. This has become painful. The girl should leave before further harm is done to her name. Her name was harmed by the hand that wrote this, Alaric said, not by the woman falsely signed beneath it. You presume falsehood because she denies it. I presume falsehood because the note is stupid. Lady Verena blinked. Stupid? Miss March has had several opportunities to speak with me under proper witness. If she wished to send information, she would not choose a garden passage in a house hostile to her, and then sign her full name like a schoolgirl practicing scandal. Lady Honoria gave a short, approving sound. There may be hope for you yet, Northmere. But the damage had already begun. A young matron near the sofa leaned toward another and whispered. Still, why was she brought here at all? Beatrice heard it. So did Verena, who smiled as though the room had obeyed her without instruction. Then Beatrice saw Mistress Pike in the corridor beyond the half-open door. The housekeeper did not enter. She only stood with a linen basket in her hands, eyes fixed on Beatrice, then glanced once toward the garden passage, visible through the rear hall. A warning, or an invitation. Beatrice understood before she could think. The ledger. Mistress Pike had found something. Beatrice turned slightly toward Lady Honoria. My lady, I believe I left my handkerchief in the hall. Lady Honoria looked at her for one heartbeat too long, then said, Do not be slow. Beatrice moved with measured steps, though her heart was striking hard enough to hurt. She reached the passage and saw Mistress Pike slip away toward the servants' stair. On the small table near the garden door lay a torn strip of ledger paper weighted beneath a calling card. Beatrice recognized the darker ink at once. Before she could lift it, Lady Verena's voice rang behind her. Mama. Beatrice turned. Lady Verena stood at the drawing-room threshold, with 2 callers behind her, and triumph carefully disguised as horror. She is exactly where the note said she would be. The garden passage seemed to grow longer, brighter, more public. Beatrice's hand hovered above the torn ledger strip. If she took it now, they would say she had come to hide correspondence. If she left it, proof might vanish. Alaric appeared behind Lady Verena, his face cut from control. Lady Dorothea followed, pale with satisfaction. Miss March, the Marchioness, said, "How unfortunate that you are always found near the thing you deny." Beatrice lifted her hand away from the paper and faced the room gathering behind them. She did not run. She would not give them that. "I did not write the note," she said. "I came because someone in this house is afraid of what was written elsewhere." Lady Verena laughed softly. "That sounds very clever, but cleverness isn't innocence." Alaric's voice answered before Beatrice could. "Nor is rank." Lady Dorothea's expression chilled. The callers heard it. Lady Verena heard it. Beatrice heard something more, something dangerous and necessary. He had defended her, but he had not spoken over her. Not yet. The torn ledger strip lay inches from her hand, visible to anyone who looked down and meaningless to anyone who did not know where to look. Beatrice kept her chin raised, while the room decided what kind of woman it wished to see. In that moment, she understood that the scandal had reached its center. They no longer wanted her dismissed. They wanted her disbelieved so thoroughly that truth itself would sound like ambition when spoken in her voice. Beatrice did not reach for the torn ledger strip while Lady Dorothea watched her hand. That restraint cost more than courage. It cost proof. The paper lay beneath the calling card on the little hall table. The darker ink showing along one torn edge, close enough that her fingers seemed to ache with the need to seize it. But the drawing room had spilled into the passage behind her, and every face had become a witness waiting to be trained against her. If she took it, Lady Verena would say she was stealing another note. If she left it, the paper might vanish before nightfall. Beatrice felt the old servant's lesson rise inside her. Do not move because they expect you to move. Make them show their own hand first. She let her arm fall to her side. "I did not come to meet His Grace," she said, steady enough that her fear had nowhere visible to go. "I came because Mistress Pike wished me to see something." Lady Dorothea's eyes shifted, not toward Mistress Pike, but toward the table. It was the smallest mistake. Alaric saw it. Lady Honoria saw it. Beatrice felt the room tilt toward truth by the width of a breath. Lady Verena stepped forward quickly. How convenient! A housekeeper, a hidden paper, and a maid who always happens to be where scandal blooms. It's almost theatrical. "Then you should feel at home, Miss Fell," Lady Honoria said. Verena's smile tightened. Lady Dorothea moved toward the table. "If there is household paper in my hall, it belongs to me." "Does it?" Beatrice asked. The Marchioness stopped. The question was not loud, but it struck, because it came from someone who should not have asked anything. Beatrice turned to Lady Honoria. "My lady, may I request that the paper be taken into your keeping until it can be examined by someone who knows accounts and has no interest in Harrowgate House?" Lady Honoria's eyes sharpened with approval. "You may, and I shall enjoy doing it." She reached the table before Lady Dorothea could object, lifted the calling card with 2 fingers, and took the torn strip as though it were an invitation to dinner. "There. The paper is now in the possession of an old woman with excellent eyesight and a disagreeable character. If anyone objects, they may write to my solicitor and bore him instead of me." A few callers looked down, either to hide amusement or alarm. Lady Dorothea's face hardened. This is outrageous. No, Alaric said. It is useful. Beatrice did not look at him. If she did, the room would see what she felt, and what she felt was too complicated to survive public inspection. Gratitude, anger, and a strange wounded trust moved together in her chest. He had defended her in the passage. He had also sent her away without asking. Both truths stood beside him. Lady Verena took a careful breath, and her voice softened into injury. Your Grace, surely you're not going to allow a servant's suspicion to insult Mamma in her own house. Alaric's gaze remained on the torn strip in Lady Honoria's hand. Suspicion did not insult Lady Harrowgate. If anything has, it appears to have been ink. That landed, not as loudly as accusation, more dangerously. Lady Dorothea dismissed the callers soon after, though she did so with enough polish to make retreat look like command. Lady Honoria did not linger. She placed Beatrice beside her in the carriage, the torn ledger strip tucked inside her reticule, and said nothing until Harrowgate House had disappeared behind a turn of Mayfair stone. Then she looked at Beatrice. You wanted to snatch it. Yes, my lady, but you did not. No, my lady. Good. Impulse is how women without power are made to look guilty. Beatrice folded her hands in her lap. The blue ribbon was still hidden beneath her glove now, transferred there before she left Lady Honoria's house. The note threatening the Duke remained folded in her pocket. The weight of secrets had become almost physical. Do you know someone who can read the account properly? She asked. I know 3 men who can read accounts, 2 who can keep silent, and 1 who owes me enough gratitude to do both. Lady Honoria tapped the roof of the carriage with her cane. We are going to Mr. Abel Prynne. The name reached Beatrice like a voice from another life. Mr. Prynne? You know him? He was once steward to Sir Edmund Vale, was he not? Among other men who thought themselves cleverer than ledgers. Beatrice looked toward the window, but the London street blurred. He knew my father. Lady Honoria's expression changed slightly. Then perhaps Providence has better manners than I gave it credit for. Mr. Abel Prynne lived in a narrow brick house near Bloomsbury, modest, clean, and lined with books that seemed to have survived more loyally than people. He was thin, stooped, and white-haired, with spectacles that magnified eyes still sharp enough to make lies uncomfortable. When Lady Honoria introduced Beatrice as Miss March, he looked at her for a long moment. Edwin March's daughter, Beatrice curtsied. Yes, sir. Your father paid every debt he could, and apologized for the ones other men made impossible. I remember that. The kindness was plain. That made it almost unbearable. Beatrice lowered her eyes. Thank you. Do not thank me for remembering honestly. It is the cheapest courtesy and the least often paid. Lady Honoria handed him the torn ledger strip. We require your eyes, Abel, not your poetry. Mr. Prynne sat by the window and studied the paper. The room fell into the waiting silence of people who understand that ink can condemn more cleanly than speech. He read the torn lines once, then again. This is from a household account book, Harrowgate House, unless I am much mistaken. You are not, Lady Honoria said. The amount has been altered. Beatrice stepped closer. Can you tell what it was? Not entirely, but see here. He pointed to a thickened curve in the ink. A 6 made into an 8. A 2 darkened to look like a 7. Clumsy if one knows where to look. Effective if no one expects a marchioness to cheat her own household pages. Beatrice felt the words settle. Cheat. Not mistake. Not misunderstanding. Mr. Prynne turned the strip toward the light. The item appears to be listed under medicinal supplies. Tincture. Bitter root. Gentian, unless the missing portion names something similar. purchased through a secondary account, not the usual apothecary. "Why hide tonic?" Lady Honoria asked. Mr. Prynne's mouth tightened. "One does not hide tonic. One hides the reason for purchasing it, or the person sent to collect it, or the debt paid alongside it." Beatrice remembered Lady Dorothea's voice in the pantry. "Truth will become very expensive for you." "There are debts," she said. "I heard servants speak of tradesmen waiting." "Most great houses have debts," Lady Honoria replied. "The question is whether Harrowgate House has reached the kind that makes a mother desperate to marry her daughter to Northmere." Mr. Prynne looked over his spectacles. If Lady Harrowgate altered accounts, dismissed a servant who noticed, and tied a scandal to a duke, desperation has already entered the drawing-room. Beatrice touched the edge of the table. For a moment, she was no longer in Bloomsbury. She was, 12 years old, watching her father sit before a ledger with his hand pressed to his brow, learning that numbers were not cold at all. They were doors closing. They were servants let go. They were books sold by the yard. They were a mother saying there was enough coal while the grate was already dark. "Miss March," Lady Honoria said more gently than usual, "you have gone very pale. Ledgers have not been kind to my family." Mr. Prynne folded the strip with care. "Then let this one serve you better." A knock came before Beatrice could answer. Lady Honoria's footman entered with a card, and Lady Honoria read it without surprise. Northmere. Beatrice's heart betrayed her with one hard beat. Lady Honoria looked at her, then at Mr. Prynne. "I shall receive him here. The door remains open. Abel, look as respectable as your profession permits." Alaric entered moments later, controlled as ever, but his eyes went first to Beatrice, not the paper. He did not approach too closely. He bowed to Lady Honoria. Acknowledged Mr. Prynne, then looked at Beatrice with a restraint that felt almost like apology before he spoke. "Miss March, I was informed you left Harrowgate House with evidence." "I did not take it," she said. "Lady Honoria did. At my age, theft becomes curation," Lady Honoria said. "Sit, Northmere, or stand and look severe. It makes no difference to me." Alaric remained standing. "I owe you an apology," he said to Beatrice. No one moved. Even Lady Honoria held her tongue. Beatrice's fingers tightened around the back of the chair. "For what, Your Grace?" "For believing safety was the same as justice. For arranging your removal before asking whether you wished to go. For protecting the case and failing to protect your voice." The exactness of it struck harder than warmth. He had named the wound correctly. That made it difficult to defend against him. "I understood why you did it," she said. "Understanding doesn't make it right." The contraction, spoken in his low, controlled voice, made the sentence feel human rather than formal. Beatrice looked down before he could see too much. "No, it does not." Mr. Prynne cleared his throat, perhaps to rescue them both from honesty. He explained the altered amounts, the medicinal entry, and the likelihood that the torn strip belonged to a larger pattern of hidden debt and unusual purchasers. Alaric listened without interruption. When Mr. Prynne finished, the Duke's expression had become very cold. "So, the tea was not merely an insult," he said. "It was a convenience. Remove Miss March before she remembers the accounts. Or discredit her so thoroughly," Beatrice said. "That memory sounds like spite." He looked at her then, and she did not look away. Something passed between them. Not romance, not yet. Something steadier, recognition. "What do you wish to do?" he asked. It was the question he had failed to ask before. Beatrice felt the room hold its breath. Lady Honoria watched her with bright, fierce approval. Mr. Prynne folded his hands over the ledger strip. Alaric waited. He truly waited. Beatrice thought of Harrogate House, of the spoon, the powder, the forged note, the women who smiled while building a gallows out of manners. "I want to return," she said, "not by the servants' door, not to plead. I want them to see that I am not hidden." Alaric's eyes darkened with concern, but he did not forbid it. "It will be unpleasant." "It was unpleasant when I was silent." Lady Honoria smiled slowly. "There she is." Beatrice stood a little straighter. "If Lady Verena and Lady Harrogate wish to make me a scandal, then I will attend as one who has not agreed to be ashamed." For the first time, Alaric's control seemed to bend around something like admiration. "Then we will choose the room carefully." "No," Beatrice said. "They chose the room when they accused me. We will choose the terms." The decision frightened her. It also returned something she had thought poverty had taken for good. Not safety, not happiness, will. And as the torn ledger strip lay on the table, between them, Beatrice understood that she had not only kept evidence alive, she had kept herself from being buried with it. Harrogate House looked different when Beatrice entered it in a gown instead of an apron. The front steps had not changed. The lamps still burned behind polished glass. The same footman stood at the same door with the same powdered stillness, and yet every inch of stone seemed to ask who had given her permission to cross it as a woman rather than a servant. Lady Honoria Vale walked at her side with a cane in one hand and a reticule in the other, carrying herself as if she had invented social permission and could withdraw it from anyone who displeased her. Beatrice wore a plain grey evening gown Lady Honoria had ordered, altered within hours, modest at the throat, narrow at the waist, respectable without pretending wealth. It was not silk. It did not need to be. For the first time since she had come to Harrogate House, Beatrice's cap was gone. Her hair was pinned simply at the back of her head. She felt exposed without the uniform that had made her invisible, and more exposed because invisibility had never protected her at all. "Breathe," Lady Honoria said as the door opened. "If you faint, they will call it guilt. If I faint, they will call for 3 physicians and bore me to death." Beatrice almost smiled. "I won't faint, my lady." "Good. It wastes carpet." The butler announced them into the supper room with a hesitation so small that only those trained to hear hierarchy would notice it. The Dowager Countess Lady Honoria Vale, Miss March. Miss March. The name entered the room before Beatrice did. Conversation thinned. Heads turned. A gentleman she had once served with wine at this very sideboard stared as though a portrait had stepped down from the wall and accused him of dust. Lady Dorothea stood near the hearth in deep amethyst silk, her face composed with the terrible arm of a hostess who had been forced to admit an inconvenience under her roof. Lady Verena, pale blue again, stood beside a tall arrangement of white lilies, beautiful enough to make cruelty seem like taste. Alaric Weatherby was at the far end of the room, speaking with an elderly baron. His gaze found Beatrice at once. He did not move toward her immediately. That restraint mattered. If he rushed, they would say she had summoned him. If he ignored her, they would say he was ashamed. Instead, he inclined his head with the exact courtesy he might have offered any gentlewoman under Lady Honoria's protection. The room saw it. More importantly, Lady Verena saw it. Lady Dorothea came forward with both hands extended toward Lady Honoria and none toward Beatrice. "My dear Lady Honoria, how unexpected." "I sent a card," Lady Honoria replied. "If expectation failed you, blame your servants or your memory. I recommend the latter. It is less expensive." Lady Dorothea's smile held by force. "And Miss March returns to us in altered circumstances." Not altered, Lady Honoria said. Clarified. Beatrice curtsied. Lady Harrowgate. The Marchioness let the pause lengthen before answering. Miss March. It was a small victory, and Beatrice accepted it silently. Supper began with the painful elegance of people determined to prove nothing had happened, while arranging themselves around the very thing that had. Beatrice sat beside Lady Honoria, below several women who had once passed cups to her without looking up. The fork in her hand felt heavier than any tray. Across the table, Lady Verena laughed at something a young viscount said, then turned her attention with graceful malice. Miss March, how strange this must feel for you. Beatrice lifted her eyes. In what way, Miss Fell? Dining where you once served. A few guests looked down at their plates. A few looked directly at Beatrice, hungry for the wince. She gave them none. I have found that rooms change less than people imagine. One sees more from the sideboard than from the table. Lady Honoria made a pleased sound into her glass. Alaric's knife stilled for one beat, then resumed. Lady Verena's smile sharpened. How observant, perhaps too observant for comfort. Only for those who prefer not to be observed. The silence that followed was brief, but it had shape. Lady Dorothea cut into it smoothly. Miss March has always had an unusual confidence for a girl in service. Confidence? Lady Honoria said. No, Dorothea. Confidence fills a room and demands admiration. Miss March has composure. You may have confused the two because you see so little of the latter. Beatrice kept her gaze on her plate. She could not afford to enjoy that, not visibly. Through the courses, she felt the room test her with glances, with pauses, with questions offered as courtesy and sharpened as insult. Where had Lady Honoria found her? Was she comfortable in her new position? Did she miss household work? Did she intend to remain in London? Each question tried to place her either above herself or beneath herself, anywhere except where she stood. Beatrice answered plainly. No embellishment, no apology. When the ladies withdrew after supper, the men did not linger long over port. Lady Dorothea had arranged coffee and tea in the smaller drawing-room, a more intimate stage with fewer shadows and more witnesses, close enough to hear a whisper. Beatrice knew the choice was deliberate as soon as she saw the tea table. The preserved service was laid out upon a side table, or seemed to be. Rose-handled spoons rested in a neat row beside the cups. Lady Honoria noticed the direction of Beatrice's gaze. Do you see it? She murmured. Beatrice counted once, then again. 11. Her pulse cooled. One is missing. The original? Yes. Across the room, Alaric entered with the Baron and another gentleman. He did not look first at Lady Verena or the tea. He looked at Beatrice. She gave no signal beyond lowering her eyes briefly to the side table. His gaze followed. He counted as she had counted. Something in his face became still. Lady Dorothea clapped her hands softly. Tea, I think. Without incident, one hopes. Hope is a weak household system, Lady Honoria said. Counting is better. Lady Verena turned. Counting what? Beatrice answered before Lady Honoria could. The spoons, Miss Fell. Every eye moved to the side table. Lady Verena's expression showed surprise too quickly, as though she had practiced innocence and entered half a second early. Do you still concern yourself with spoons? When one is missing, yes. Lady Dorothea's voice became cool. You speak as though you have authority over my silver. No, my lady. I speak as someone once accused because of it. Alaric stepped closer, but not between them. Beatrice felt his presence at her left, steady and controlled, close enough to prevent the room from crushing her, not close enough to claim her words. Lady Verena lifted her chin. Perhaps it was misplaced below stairs. These things happen when servants are careless. The service has been watched since the afternoon tea, Alaric said, at my request. Lady Dorothea's colour changed. You had my silver watched, I had evidence preserved. How dramatic, Verena said. All for a spoon. Not for a spoon, Beatrice said. The words came quietly, and that made the room listen, for the truth attached to it. Something moved in Verena's eyes. Anger, quickly veiled. What a noble phrase. Did Lady Honoria teach it to you? No, Lady Harrowgate did, when she threatened what truth would cost. The room went cold. Lady Dorothea set down her cup. You forget yourself. No, my lady, I remember myself. That is why I am here. A murmur broke, small but real. Not all of it favoured Beatrice, but not all of it condemned her either. Doubt had entered the room, and doubt was the first crack in a polished lie. Lady Verena crossed to a small writing table near the window. Then, perhaps, memory will assist us all. Her voice was bright now, almost triumphant. Mamma did not wish to mention it before supper. It seemed unkind, but since Miss March insists upon silver, we should be honest. Lady Honoria's cane touched the floor once. I dislike that sentence already. Lady Verena opened a drawer and withdrew a folded cloth. Beatrice felt her body understand before her mind did. The blue ribbon in her glove seemed to burn. Verena unfolded the cloth upon the table. There, bright beneath the lamps, lay the Harrowgate silver spoon with the falcon crest. It was found this afternoon, Verena said, looking not at the Duke but at Beatrice, among Miss March's things. The room turned as one body. Beatrice did not step back. She would not. Alaric's voice came low beside her, controlled enough to be dangerous. Found by whom? Lady Verena smiled. Sorrowful and perfect. Does it matter, Your Grace? It's hers now, isn't it? Unless she can explain why your bitter spoon followed her out of this house. For one suspended moment, no one in the drawing-room seemed to breathe. The silver spoon lay upon the folded cloth like a small, bright verdict, its falcon crest turned upward, its bowl catching the lamplight with the same cold shine. Beatrice remembered from the Duke's saucer. Every face waited for her to do the expected thing. Deny too quickly, tremble too visibly, look toward Alaric Weatherby as if a Duke's protection could replace her own spine. Lady Verena had placed the trap with care. If Beatrice pleaded, she would look guilty. If she remained silent, guilt would settle over her like dust. If Alaric spoke first, the room would whisper that she had trained him to defend her. That was why his stillness startled her. He did not stride between them. He did not take the spoon from the table. He did not turn his rank into a wall and hide her behind it. Instead, he looked at Beatrice and asked, with every guest listening, "Miss March, do you wish to answer this yourself, or shall I intervene?" The question moved through her like warmth after cold water. It was not rescue. It was choice. Lady Verena's smile faltered because she heard it too. Lady Dorothea stiffened, and Lady Honoria's eyes flashed with approval sharp enough to cut glass. Beatrice felt the fear in her hands, in her throat, in the old place beneath her ribs where poverty had taught her to expect decisions to be made elsewhere. Then she stepped forward. "I will answer, Your Grace." He inclined his head and gave her the room. The gesture was slight. Its effect was not. Beatrice turned toward the folded cloth, not touching it. "Miss Fell says the spoon was found among my things." Lady Verena lifted her chin. "It was. Which a bundle sent from Lady Honoria's house. By whom a servant discovered it." "Which servant?" Verena's eyes cooled. "Do you intend to cross-examine my household now?" "No," Beatrice said. "I intend to understand the accusation." since everyone else appears to have understood it before I was told. A murmur passed through the room. Lady Dorothea's fan opened with a snap. Your tone does not assist you. Neither would silence, my lady. Beatrice looked again at the spoon. Her voice steadied as she followed the plain path of sense. The only road left to a woman they had tried to surround with lies. If I had stolen from Harrogate House, I would not choose the object every person here connects to my humiliation. If I wished profit, I would choose something less memorable. If I wished to hide guilt, I would not carry away the very spoon His Grace asked to have preserved. Lady Verena gave a little laugh. A clever thief might think no one would suspect such obvious folly. Then she would be clever enough not to leave it in a bundle where any servant might find it. Lady Honoria tapped her cane once against the carpet, a point so plain that I am astonished it needed saying. Lady Dorothea turned on her. This is intolerable. Alaric spoke then, quiet and exact. It is inconvenient. There is a difference. He stepped toward the table at last, but only after Beatrice had finished. May I examine it, Lady Harrogate? The Marchioness hesitated. To refuse would look like fear. To agree would risk discovery. She chose pride. If it will satisfy this theatre. Alaric lifted the spoon by the handle, using the edge of the cloth. Beatrice watched his eyes move over the crest, the bowl, then the slender handle. He became very still. Interesting. Lady Verena's lips parted. What is? He angled the spoon beneath the lamp. There is wax on the handle. Wax? Lady Dorothea repeated. Many things in a house touch wax. Candles, seals, desks. Indeed. Alaric turned the handle slightly. A faint smear clung near the falcon's wing, pale blue against the silver. Not obvious at first glance. Not invisible once seen. Beatrice felt the blue ribbon hidden in her glove, as if the silk had tightened around her fingers. Lady Verena's gown seemed suddenly too bright. Lady Honoria leaned forward. Blue wax, Northmere. Pale blue. Alaric looked toward Lady Verena's writing table, where her correspondence box rested beside a vase of lilies. On its lid sat a stick of sealing wax in a shade nearly identical to the smear. The room noticed. That was the power of a duke's gaze. It taught other people where to look. Lady Verena laughed too softly. Many ladies use colored wax. True, Alaric said. Few have just produced evidence carrying it. Lady Dorothea rose. You go too far. Not yet. The words were calm enough to chill the air. Miss Fell, when was this spoon found? This afternoon. Before or after my request that the tea service be watched? Verena glanced toward her mother. I don't keep track of your requests, Your Grace. No, but someone did. He set the spoon down again. Who handled Miss March's bundle? Lady Dorothea's voice cut in. We are not putting my daughter on trial because a former maid has practiced a moving speech. Then perhaps we shall put the paper on trial. Alaric reached toward the small writing desk, where a folded sheet lay beside an inkwell. Lady Dorothea moved sharply. That is private. It is visible. He did not touch it. He did not need to. Beatrice saw what he had seen. The sheet bore a broken edge where a seal had been torn away. Pale blue wax dust marked the wood. Lady Verena had sealed something in haste, perhaps a note, perhaps the folded cloth, perhaps the instruction that carried the spoon into Beatrice's things. The room had not reached certainty, but doubt had changed sides. Lady Dorothea sensed it. Her eyes moved over the guests and found the danger. Enough. Miss March will sign a statement that the spoon was found among her possessions and that she cannot explain how it came there. We shall leave the matter to private mercy. Mistress Pike, summoned earlier with the tea service, stood near the door with her face pale. A footman brought paper at Lady Dorothea's gesture. Beatrice saw the shape of the next trap at once. A statement that said almost nothing and implied everything. A sentence clean enough to ruin her without accusing anyone else. Lady Dorothea took the pen. "You will sign, Beatrice, if you value any chance of future employment." For a moment, the old terror opened under her feet. Employment, character, bread, shelter, the respectable words that kept poor women obedient. Before she could speak, Alaric crossed the room and took the paper from the footman's tray. "No," Lady Dorothea's face blazed. "Your Grace, no. Statement will be signed under threat in my presence. You have no authority over my household papers. I have authority over my own name, my own cup, and the accusation being attached to both." He turned to Beatrice, and this time his voice changed, not softer, more human. "Miss March, do you consent to sign that paper?" "No, Your Grace." "Then you will not." Lady Dorothea took one step forward. "This is outrageous." Alaric folded the paper once, then held it to the candle flame beside the mantel. The edge blackened. Fire took the writing before the words could become a weapon. He dropped the ash into the grate. No one spoke. The act was small, almost domestic, yet the room understood it as a line drawn through the center of the house. Lady Honoria smiled like a general watching a bridge burn at the perfect hour. "Well done, Northmere. You have finally made yourself useful." Beatrice could not look away from the grate. The forced confession had become smoke. She had seen many things destroyed in her life. Furniture, books, reputation, hope. She had never seen a lie destroyed before it could be used. Lady Verena's voice came thinly. "You make much of consent for a servant." Alaric looked at her. "I make much of consent for any woman whose future is being cornered by people more powerful than she is." The words settled over Beatrice with a force she felt more than heard. Something in her had been waiting to know whether he understood. Not the facts, not the spoon. Her, the fact that protection without choice could become another cage, even when built by honorable hands. His gaze returned to hers, and for once the room around them blurred at the edges, not into romance, not yet into trust difficult and newly made. Lady Dorothea gathered herself with effort. "If you will not permit private resolution, what do you propose?" "A clear one." Alaric turned to the room. "Tomorrow morning, those who witnessed the first accusation will return to this drawing room. Mistress Pike will bring the tea service as preserved. The footman assigned to the side table will attend. Lady Honoria will bring the account fragment. Mr. Abel Prynne will verify the figures if required. Miss March will be heard without interruption." Lady Verena went very still. "You cannot command our guests." "No," he said. "I can invite them to observe whether Harrowgate House prefers truth or convenience. Most people are curious when the choice is made plain." Lady Dorothea's lips whitened. "And if I refuse?" Alaric's expression was colder than Beatrice had ever seen it. "Then I shall draw my own conclusion publicly, and so will everyone who hears that I was served a bitter cup in your house, while your daughter produced the spoon with her own wax upon it." Silence answered. It was not the silence that had condemned Beatrice in the beginning. This silence belonged to the guilty. Lady Dorothea knew it. Lady Verena knew it. The guests, who had come hoping to observe a fallen maid, now looked as if they feared witnessing a falling house. At last, Lady Dorothea inclined her head, the motion stiff with fury. "Tomorrow, then! Tomorrow!" Alaric said. Beatrice stood very still as the room began to move around her. Lady Honoria came to her side, but Beatrice's eyes remained on the Duke. He had not saved her by taking her voice. He had returned it before everyone. That difference was quiet. It was everything. Morning made Harrowgate House look innocent, which Beatrice found more unsettling than darkness. Sunlight entered the drawing room through tall windows and laid itself across the carpet, the gilded chairs, the porcelain shepherdess on the mantel, and the tea table where ruin had first been served with sugar tongs. Nothing in the room confessed. The curtains hung straight. The flowers had been changed. The hearth had been swept clean. A stranger entering might have seen only elegance, but Beatrice saw positions. There, near the window, Lady Verena had tasted her own tea and smiled. There, beside the side table, Beatrice had stepped away to fetch hot water. There, in the chair angled toward the hearth, the Duke of Northmere had set down his bitter cup and refused to let the room devour her. Lady Honoria Vale arrived with Beatrice at precisely 11 o'clock, because she said punctuality was the only weapon polite society could not openly resent. Beatrice wore the same grey gown, brushed until the fabric looked almost fine. Her gloves hid the small burn near her thumb, but not the memory of it. In Lady Honoria's reticule rested the torn ledger strip, folded within a plain envelope. In Beatrice's own pocket lay the blue ribbon and the threatening note. Each object felt small enough to lose and heavy enough to alter a life. The room was already occupied when they entered. Lady Dorothea stood near the mantel, her face pale with powder and fury. Lady Verena sat beside her, hands folded, her blue gown chosen again with deliberate softness. Mistress Pike waited near the door, rigid with anxiety. The footman, who had stood by the side table during the original tea service, kept his eyes fixed ahead. Mr. Abel Prynne had come at Lady Honoria's request, looking painfully respectable in an old black coat. Several of the original witnesses had returned as well, drawn by curiosity they would later call duty. Alaric Weatherby stood at the centre of the room, not as host, because Harrowgate House was not his, but as the man whom the first insult had touched. He turned when Beatrice entered. He did not smile. A smile would have made her smaller in front of them. Instead, he bowed. "Miss March." 2 words properly spoken, and the room was forced to hear the name that had been buried under maid, girl, and servant. Beatrice curtsied. "Your Grace." Lady Dorothea's mouth tightened. "Must we begin with ceremony?" "We began with accusation," Alaric said. "Ceremony is an improvement." Lady Honoria settled herself in a chair with the calm of an elderly queen who had decided not to invade only because the furniture was tolerable. "Proceed, Northmere. Some of us are old, and all of us are impatient." Alaric inclined his head. "This is not a court. No one here pretends it is. It is a private gathering of those who witnessed an accusation made in this room, and those whose testimony may clarify it. Lady Harrowgate, since the accusation was made in your house, you will have every opportunity to speak. Miss Fell will also speak. So will Miss March. She will not be interrupted." Lady Dorothea's eyes flashed. "You cannot command silence from my guests." "No," he said. "I can ask whether they prefer truth to noise." No one accepted the invitation to object. Beatrice felt the first dangerous pressure of attention settle on her. It was not the same as the first day. Then they had looked at her as one looks at a stain. Now they looked as if a stain might prove to be blood on someone else's glove. Alaric turned to her. "Miss March, tell the room what happened from the first cup." Beatrice had rehearsed nothing, because rehearsed speech could sound like performance. She spoke plainly, hands folded, voice low enough that the room had to lean toward truth rather than be struck by it. "I arranged the rose-handled tea service before the afternoon tea. 12 cups, 12 saucers, 12 rose spoons, sugar tongs, and cream ladle. I carried the tray upstairs. I poured from the common pot for several ladies, and then for his grace. Lady Verena asked me to bring more hot water to the side table, and I stepped away. When his grace tasted his tea, he said it was bitter. No other cup was bitter. And you expect us to believe, Lady Verena said softly, that you saw everything while doing nothing. Alaric did not raise his voice. Miss Fell, one warning. No more. Verena lowered her eyes. Beatrice continued. The spoon in his grace's saucer was not from the service I arranged. It bore the Harrogate falcon. Later, when I checked the service below stairs, one rose spoon was missing, and a crest-marked spoon had been placed among them. The footman shifted near the door. Alaric looked toward him. Thomas Reed, you were assigned near the side table that afternoon. The footman swallowed. Yes, Your Grace. Who approached the side table after Miss March stepped away. His gaze flickered toward Lady Verena, then away so quickly that it might have been missed by anyone who did not need the truth. Miss Fell stood there, Your Grace. Only a moment. I thought she wanted sugar. Verena gave a hurt laugh. I stood near a table in my own house. Is that now suspicious? Lady Honoria said, only when people keep finding spoons afterward. A tight silence followed. Alaric allowed it to settle, then turned to Mistress Pike, the still room. Mistress Pike drew in a breath. Gentian tonic was kept there, Your Grace. The bottle was lower after the tea than before. I cannot say who used it. Lady Harrogate has a key. I have the household keys. Miss Fell has borrowed a key before for rose water and salts. Lady Dorothea's fan snapped open. Borrowed under my knowledge. Then that can be noted, Alaric said. His control made her anger look ungenerous. Beatrice took the threatening note from her pocket next. Her fingers were steady until the paper unfolded. This was placed in my apron after the powder was found in my room. Alaric read it aloud only after asking with his eyes, and Beatrice gave the smallest nod. Confess, or the Duke will be ruined with you. A murmur moved across the room, not loud enough to be rude, too loud to be ignored. Lady Verena's face remained pale and perfect. Beatrice placed the blue ribbon beside the note. This was caught near the still-room hinge after the tea. Verena's gaze dropped to it. The movement was tiny. It was enough. Many ribbons are blue, she said. Many lies are pale, Lady Honoria answered. Lady Dorothea rose, her composure cracking at last. I will not have my daughter slandered by scraps, servants, and an old steward hungry for relevance. Mr. Prynne adjusted his spectacles. Madam, I am rarely hungry before luncheon. Lady Honoria smiled. And never for relevance. Alaric took the envelope from Lady Honoria and handed the torn ledger strip to Mr. Prynne. State what you found. Mr. Prynne stood slowly. The strip comes from a household account. The sum has been altered. The entry concerns medicinal supplies, likely gentian, or another bitter tonic. The account was not made through the usual apothecary. The handwriting on the alteration is not a servant's hand. It resembles the hand used on Lady Harrogate's household approvals, though the full page would settle the matter more firmly. Lady Dorothea's voice turned icy. If you imply fraud in my household, sir, I shall speak with my solicitor. Do, Lady Honoria said. Solicitors enjoy paper, and you appear to have misplaced some. The guests looked no longer at Beatrice, but at Lady Dorothea. That was the first true reversal. Not vindication. Not yet, but the direction of suspicion had changed, and the room could feel it. Beatrice felt it too, and it frightened her almost as much as accusation had. Hope was a dangerous thing when other people held the doors. Lady Verena rose with delicate outrage. This is monstrous. A girl is dismissed from service, taken up by Lady Honoria, defended by his Grace, and now she repays kindness by manufacturing a romance out of injury, and an injury out of household confusion. Beatrice's face warmed, but she did not lower her eyes. Alaric's voice cut cleanly through the air. You will not attach impropriety to Miss March, because evidence has attached itself to you. Verena went still. Lady Dorothea stepped forward. Your Grace, you will apologize. No. Beatrice had heard that word from him before. This time, it did not merely stop punishment. It opened a path. Alaric crossed to the tea table, where the preserved service waited beneath a linen cloth. Enough fragments. We will return to the first lie. He lifted the silver spoon once more, holding it where the morning light struck the falcon crest. The cup was bitter. The pot was not. Let us begin where the truth began. The silver spoon looked almost harmless in Alaric Weatherby's hand, which made the room's fear more revealing. A weapon of gold might have been easier to understand. A letter with a broken seal might have seemed worthy of scandal. But this was only a spoon, engraved with the Harrogate falcon, polished for generations by servants whose names no one upstairs had remembered, and it had waited longer than any person in the room to be heard. Beatrice stood beside Lady Honoria, hands folded, the blue ribbon and the threatening note laid upon the table with the torn ledger strip. She did not look at Lady Verena. Not yet. She looked instead at the tea service, arranged as it had been on the afternoon, when one bitter cup had nearly swallowed her life. 12 saucers, 12 cups, 11 rose spoons, 1 crest-marked intruder. Alaric set the falcon spoon beside the rose-handled row. Miss March, he said, you arranged the original tray. Yes, Your Grace. Show the room where my cup stood when you carried it in. Beatrice stepped forward. The movement took more courage than speaking. She placed her gloved finger near the front right of the tray. Here. The cup was empty when I entered. I poured from the common pot after serving Lady Westbrook and Mrs. Anstruther. Lady Westbrook, a plump countess who had not expected to become useful, nodded uneasily. My tea was quite ordinary. Mine also, Mrs. Anstruther murmured. Alaric turned to the pot. The pot served several cups. Only mine was bitter. Therefore the bitterness entered after the pour. Lady Dorothea made a sharp sound. You are repeating yourself as though repetition makes accusation. No, Alaric said. I am repeating it because the first time your household attempted to bury it under a maid. Beatrice felt the words strike the room, not loudly, but deeply. Lady Verena rose halfway from her chair. This is cruel. Lady Honoria looked at her. My dear, cruelty is what one does when one cannot bear evidence. Alaric continued before Lady Verena could recover. Thomas Reed. The footman came forward, white around the mouth. Yes, Your Grace. You stood at the side table. Yes, Your Grace. After Miss March stepped away for hot water, who approached my saucer? Thomas swallowed. His eyes flickered toward Lady Dorothea, who stared as if she could command memory itself to kneel. Miss Fell, Your Grace. The room changed. It was almost soundless, but Beatrice felt it. The first wall had cracked. Lady Verena gave a soft laugh. I passed the table. I may have adjusted a spoon. A hostess's daughter does little things without thinking. That is possible, Alaric said. So we shall ask why this particular little thing left gentian on the bowl and blue wax on the handle. He held the spoon beneath the morning light. The pale smear near the crest was clear now that everyone had been taught to see it. He did not point toward Lady Verena's writing box. He did not need to. The matching pale blue sealing wax sat visible on the small desk. where she had written dozens of charming notes to women who would no longer look directly at her. "Many ladies use coloured wax," Lady Verena said. "Yes," Beatrice said quietly. Every head turned toward her. She had not meant to speak, but the truth had reached the place where silence would become cowardice. But not many ladies left a blue ribbon on the still-room hinge after gentian had been taken. Lady Verena's eyes flashed. "You picked up a ribbon and imagined a crime." Beatrice removed the ribbon from where it had been folded in her glove and placed it beside the spoon. "No, I picked up a ribbon and waited for the crime to finish explaining itself." Lady Honoria's cane touched the carpet once, a soft signal of approval. Alaric's gaze did not leave Lady Verena. Mistress Pike, the still room. The housekeeper stepped forward, voice thin but steady. "The gentian bottle was lower after the tea, Your Grace. I did not use it. No servant was ordered to use it. Lady Harrogate and Miss Fell both had means to take a key." Lady Dorothea stood. "You forget yourself, Mistress Pike." "No, my lady," the housekeeper said, and her hands shook as she said it. "I remember the bottle." That small defiance seemed to shake Lady Dorothea more than the Duke's questions had. Servants could be frightened. They were not supposed to become witnesses. Mr. Prynne adjusted his spectacles and lifted the torn ledger strip. "The account supports the housekeeper. Bitter tonic was purchased under a secondary account. The sum was altered. The purchase was not ordinary household restocking. It was concealed. Concealed because tradesmen gossip," Lady Dorothea said. "Because debt embarrasses families. That is not a crime." "No," Alaric said. "Debt is not. Framing a woman to hide what she saw is another matter." Lady Dorothea's fan trembled once before she closed it. "This is monstrous supposition." "Then explain the powder placed in Miss March's room." "Servants carry many things." "Explain the forged note. A romantic girl can write foolishly." "Explain why the same Harrogate paper wrapped the powder and carried the false invitation." "Explain why blue wax marked the spoon." "Explain why the ledger page was torn precisely where the tonic purchase would be most clear." "Explain why Miss Fell was at the side table after Miss March had poured the cup." Each sentence left less air for lying. Lady Verena looked around the room and found no safe face. The beauty that had made her powerful now seemed fragile because it had always required admiration to complete it. Without admiration, she was only a young woman in blue with too many accidents gathering at her feet. "I only meant to stop her," she said. The room froze. Lady Dorothea turned. "Verena," but the word came too late. Lady Verena's composure broke in a rush of wounded pride. She was everywhere, always listening, always remembering. Mamma said she had seen the accounts. His Grace looked at her as if she were not a servant at all. "I thought, if the tea were bitter, she would be dismissed. It was not poison, it was only tonic. It was only meant to be unpleasant." The admission fell into the room without ornament. Only tonic, only unpleasant, only a maid. Beatrice felt no triumph. She felt suddenly tired, as if every hour of fear had returned to her body at once. Lady Dorothea recovered faster than anyone else. "My daughter was distressed. She acted without guidance." Mr. Prynne lifted the ledger strip. "The altered accounts are not in your daughter's hand, Lady Harrogate." Lady Honoria said, "How inconvenient when ink refuses maternal devotion." Lady Dorothea's face hardened. "I protected my family." "You protected a debt," Alaric said. "You protected an alliance you hoped to force through charm and concealment. And when Miss March became inconvenient, you allowed her name, her work, and her womanhood to be used as refuse." Lady Dorothea's eyes went to Beatrice then, truly to Beatrice, perhaps for the first time. There was no apology in them, only resentment that someone so low had become so difficult to bury. She was a servant in my house. Beatrice stepped forward before Alaric could answer. The room had spoken about her enough. I was poor, my lady. I was never yours to ruin. The silence after that was not empty. It held every version of Beatrice the room had tried to erase. Maid, girl, shemmer, thief, fool, temptress. None of them stood now. Only Miss March remained. Lady Verena sank back into her chair, pale and shaking. Lady Dorothea stayed upright by force of pride alone. Alaric turned to the gathered guests. You witnessed the accusation. You will witness the correction. Miss March did not bitter the tea. She did not steal the spoon. She did not place powder in her room or write the note attributed to her. Her character was attacked because she was believed too powerless to defend it. One by one, eyes lowered. Lady Westbrook looked ashamed. Mrs. Anstruther pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. Even the Baron by the mantel gave a grave nod. Lady Harrowgate, Alaric said, you and Miss Fell will apologize to Miss March before this room. Lady Dorothea's lips parted in outrage. I will not be commanded. Then you will be abandoned socially by everyone who hears that you refuse to restore a woman you helped disgrace. Lady Honoria smiled, and they will hear it before dinner. I am elderly, not slow. Lady Verena broke first. I'm sorry, she whispered, not from grace, but from defeat. Beatrice accepted nothing yet. She only inclined her head. Lady Dorothea's apology came like a stone forced through silk. Miss March, I regret the misunderstanding. Not misunderstanding, Alaric said. False accusation. The Marchioness's face whitened. I regret the false accusation. Beatrice's throat tightened, but her voice held. Then I hear it, my lady. She did not forgive. Not there. Not for their comfort. Alaric turned to Mistress Pike. Miss March will receive a written restoration of character before she leaves this house. It will state plainly that she was falsely accused and that no suspicion remains against her. Mistress Pike curtsied, tears bright in her eyes. Yes, your grace. House of Wetherby, Alaric added, looking now at Lady Dorothea and Lady Verena, will pursue no alliance with House of Fell. Any account irregularities concerning tradesmen or household debt will be reviewed by your solicitor and mine if necessary. I advise candor. Society forgives debt more readily than deceit used upon the defenseless. That was the final blow. Not shouted, not cruel, complete. Lady Dorothea sat down as if her bones had become too heavy for pride. Lady Verena stared at the spoon on the table as though it had betrayed her, but the spoon had betrayed no one. It had only remembered. The guests began to withdraw soon after, murmuring less than when they arrived. The room that had once fed on Beatrice's humiliation now seemed eager to escape its own reflection. Lady Honoria left last among the witnesses, pausing at Beatrice's side. Stand still a moment, child. Let the room learn your shape. Then she, too, stepped into the hall. When the drawing-room finally emptied, only Beatrice and Alaric remained near the tea-table, with the silver spoon lying between them. The silence was different now. No blade, no trap, only the enormous quiet that follows the truth when it has done its work and left people standing among the pieces. Alaric did not touch the spoon. He did not reach for Beatrice. He gave her the dignity of space. Miss March, he said, and his voice had lost its public edge. What life would you choose if no one were allowed to choose it for you? Beatrice looked at the room, the tray, the spoon, and the place where she had once stood accused. For the first time, the answer did not have to be survival. It could be something larger. She drew one breath, steady and free. I would need time, Your Grace, to learn what choice feels like. His eyes softened. Then time is yours. By autumn, Beatrice had learned that vindication did not arrive like a trumpet. It arrived quietly, in sealed letters, returned calls, lowered eyes, and the strange new courtesy of people who had once believed shame could be handed down like a used cloak. Lady Dorothea's written restoration of character had been copied, witnessed, and sent where it needed to be sent. Mistress Pike kept one copy in the Harrowgate household book, though Beatrice heard from Lady Honoria that the house itself had become much less fashionable than its mistress wished. Invitations to Lady Verena Fell had thinned to an embarrassing trickle. Lady Dorothea's accounts had gone under review by her solicitor, and the tradesmen who had once waited politely at side doors had begun to receive payment under terms that made even pride obey arithmetic. None of this returned Beatrice's lost years. It did not unmake the moments when every eye in a drawing-room had called her guilty. It did something quieter and perhaps more difficult. It proved that those moments had not been the end of her. For 3 months she remained with Lady Honoria Vale, not as servant, not quite as guest, and no longer as a woman hiding from her own name. She read correspondence aloud in the mornings, copied invitations in the afternoons, and learned again how to sit near a window without expecting to be summoned. Alaric Weatherby did not press himself into her recovery. That became the first proof she trusted. He called only at proper hours. He never came without Lady Honoria present. He sent no extravagant jewels, no flowers large enough to become gossip, no note that demanded gratitude. Instead, he books on estate management with dry comments in the margins, a copy of the character restoration written in his own hand for her keeping, and once a small packet of tea from Northmere Park, with a card that read, in his precise script, "No bitterness detected." Beatrice had laughed before she could stop herself, and Lady Honoria had looked up from her chair with dangerous satisfaction. "There," the old countess had said, "that sounded like a woman, not evidence." In October, the invitation came formally. The Duke of Northmere requested the honour of Lady Honoria Vale's company at Northmere Park for a fortnight, with Miss Beatrice March included as her companion. Lady Honoria read it twice and sniffed. "He has made it impossible for even the dullest gossip to object. Annoying man. Competence deprives me of argument." Beatrice stood beside the hearth, the letter held between gloved fingers. "I do not have to go." Lady Honoria looked over the paper. "No, that is precisely why you may." Northmere Park lay in the north of England, beyond miles of hedgerow, stone walls, and fields fading gold beneath the season. The house rose from a sweep of parkland with no theatrical grandeur, only the deep assurance of a place that had stood through grief, harvest, marriage, and storm. Ivy darkened one wing. Smoke lifted from chimneys into a pale afternoon sky. Servants lined the entrance hall when Lady Honoria arrived. But Beatrice noticed at once that they did not stare at her, as Harrowgate servants had stared. They bowed because she was expected, not hidden, not smuggled into protection. Expected. Alaric met them beneath the carved staircase. In the softer light of his own house, he seemed no less formidable, but less armoured. "Lady Honoria," he said with a bow, "you look prepared to criticize my roof." "I was prepared before we left London." His gaze moved to Beatrice, and whatever amusement had touched his mouth became something steadier. "Miss March, welcome to Northmere Park," she curtsied. "Thank you, Your Grace." For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The last time they had stood before a household together, a spoon had lain between them. like a witness. Now there was only open space, a fire in the great hall, and a future that had not yet been asked to take shape. During the days that followed, Alaric did not show her Northmere as a man displays wealth. He showed it as a man offering responsibility. He took Lady Honoria and Beatrice through the still room, where the housekeeper explained the remedies. Without making knowledge sound like trespass, he showed Beatrice the estate office, where ledgers lay open in good order, each entry signed by steward and duke alike. He asked her opinion on a training fund he wished to establish for young women leaving service without family support, and when she answered carefully, he listened as if her caution were more valuable than praise. In the village, he introduced her as Miss March, formerly of Lady Honoria's household, and no one laughed. No one whispered loudly enough to wound. The peace frightened Beatrice more than hostility had, because she did not know how long peace could be trusted. On the 6th evening, after Lady Honoria retired early with a headache she almost certainly invented, Beatrice found Alaric in the breakfast room, where a tray had been laid for the morning. The door was open. A maid crossed the hall beyond it. Propriety stood guard, as it always did between them, and somehow that made the tenderness safer. On the small table near the window lay the engraved silver spoon. Beatrice stopped. "You kept it." Alaric looked down at the spoon. "I asked for it after Lady Harrowgate surrendered the tea service for inspection. She was not pleased. I imagine Lady Harrowgate has been displeased often since May. Not often enough to satisfy Lady Honoria." Beatrice smiled, then looked at the falcon crest. The sight no longer made her stomach tighten. It made her remember, but memory had changed its posture. It did not kneel. "Why is it here?" she asked. Alaric was silent, long enough that the question became larger than silver. "Because I wished to ask whether you would allow it to belong to a different moment." Her hand rested on the back of a chair. What moment? He did not come closer. That too was love before he named it. A choice, freely made. Not because I protected you. Not because society owes you restoration. Not because pity has disguised itself as honor. His voice lowered. Because I have come to want your judgment beside mine, your courage in my house, and your truth where I can never again mistake silence for peace. Beatrice's breath caught. There was no crowd, no accusation, no one to force an answer into a shape useful to them. Only Alaric, the open door, the waiting tea table, and the spoon that had once proved she was not guilty. "Are you asking me to become Duchess of Northmere?" Yes, a faint tension touched his mouth. "But more than that, I'm asking whether you could share a life with me. If the answer is no, you will leave Northmere with the same respect with which you entered it. I won't make gratitude into a chain." For a moment, Beatrice saw all the lives that had been chosen over her. Debtor's daughter, servant, accused maid, convenient scandal, protected woman, restored woman. None of those names disappeared. They stood behind her like witnesses, and for the first time, they did not push. "I needed time to learn what choice felt like," she said. "I remember. It feels quieter than I expected." His expression softened. "Yes." She looked at the spoon again, then at him. "Then I choose this, I choose you, but I will not be ornament in your house." "No," he said, and the word held warmth now. "I have enough silver." She laughed, and he smiled as if the sound had relieved him more deeply than any vow. They were married 3 weeks later in the small chapel at Northmere Park, with Lady Honoria seated in front like an approving judge, and the household gathered respectfully behind. Beatrice wore ivory wool, trimmed with old lace Lady Honoria claimed had been wasted in a trunk for 30 years. Alaric's hand was steady when he placed the ring upon hers, but his voice changed on the final vow, not breaking, only becoming human enough for Beatrice to hear the heart beneath the title. London learned the news before winter. Some who had once called her the Maid now practiced, saying her grace with strained smiles. Beatrice accepted neither false intimacy nor late admiration. She answered courtesy with courtesy, and left the rest unanswered. At Northmere, she learned the estate books, opened the training fund for young women in service, and wrote personally to Mistress Pike when the first girl was placed safely in a respectable household. On her first morning as Duchess of Northmere, Beatrice entered the breakfast room before the bell was rung. Alaric was already there, standing beside the tea tray. The engraved silver spoon lay beside her cup. He watched her take it up. No fear moved through her now, only memory, polished clean by justice. She poured the tea herself, added sugar, and stirred once, twice, slowly enough to hear the small silver sound against porcelain. Alaric's eyes rested on her face. Not bitter, Beatrice lifted the cup, breathed in the steam, and smiled. "No," she said, "not any more.